Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something you carry with you every second of every day, flowing through your veins, quietly shaping who you are in ways you've probably never considered. Your blood type? You might know whether you're A positive or O negative because you donated once, or maybe it's written on a card somewhere in your wallet that you haven't looked at in years. But here's what most people don't realize. Your blood type isn't just a medical footnote for emergencies. It's a biological signature that influences your immune system, your digestion, your stress response, even your risk for certain diseases. And tonight, we're going to explore every hidden advantage tucked inside those 4 letters and symbols. So, before we dive in, take a moment to like the video if you're curious about what your blood type says about you, and subscribe if you enjoy falling asleep to biology that actually matters. And I'm always curious. Drop a comment telling me your blood type and where you're watching from. It's fascinating to see the diversity out there. Now, settle in. Maybe adjust your pillow, dim the lights, let the world outside fade away. Tonight, we're going on a slow journey through your bloodstream, and by the end, you might just see yourself a little differently. Most of us learn our blood type by accident. A physical exam, a blood drive at work, maybe during pregnancy or before a surgery. Someone hands you a card with a letter and a plus or minus sign, and you stuff it in your wallet thinking it's only relevant if you're ever in a serious accident. But your blood type has been shaping your biology since before you were born, influencing which diseases you're more likely to fight off, which ones might find you easier to infect, how your stomach processes food, how your immune system recognizes threats, even how your body responds to stress. There are 8 main blood types: A positive, A negative, B positive, B negative, AB positive, AB negative, O positive, and O negative. Together, they're distributed across humanity in wildly uneven ways. O positive is the most common, carried by around 37% of people. AB negative is the rarest, showing up in less than 1% of the global population. But these aren't just random assignments. They're evolutionary artifacts, genetic signatures left behind by thousands of years of human migration, disease, diet, and survival. Your blood type is determined by the presence or absence of certain proteins called antigens on the surface of your red blood cells. Think of antigens as tiny identification tags, molecular flags that tell your immune system this cell belongs here, don't attack it. If you have A antigens, you're type A. If you have B antigens, you're type B. If you have both, you're AB. And if you have neither, you're type O. If it's there, you're positive. If it's absent, you're negative. But here's where it gets interesting. Your immune system produces antibodies against the antigens you don't have. If you're type A, your blood contains antibodies that attack B antigens. If you're type B, you have antibodies against A. Type O individuals have antibodies against both A and B, which is why they can only receive O blood but can donate to almost anyone. Type AB people have no antibodies against A or B, making them universal receivers. This system isn't arbitrary. It evolved as a defense mechanism, a way for your body to recognize foreign invaders, and it's been shaped by thousands of generations facing infections, parasites, and environmental pressures we've mostly forgotten about. The first person to figure this out was an Austrian scientist named Karl Landsteiner, working in a laboratory in Vienna in the year 1900. Before Landsteiner, blood transfusions were deadly gambles. Doctors knew that sometimes giving someone else's blood worked miraculously, and sometimes the patient died within minutes. thrashing and burning with fever as their immune system went to war against the foreign cells. No one understood why. Landsteiner mixed blood samples from different people and watched what happened under a microscope. Sometimes the red blood cells clumped together in ugly, dangerous clusters. Sometimes they didn't. He realized there were distinct types, invisible categories that determined compatibility. His discovery saved millions of lives and earned him a Nobel Prize. But even Landsteiner didn't fully understand why these types existed in the first place. Scientists now believe blood types emerged as evolutionary responses to infectious diseases. Different populations, isolated by geography and facing different pathogens, developed different blood type distributions. Type O, the oldest, likely dominated early human populations because it offered protection against severe malaria. Type A became more common as humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture, possibly because it provided some advantage in denser, settled communities where new diseases spread easily. Type B appeared later, concentrated in populations living in the Himalayas and Central Asia, perhaps shaped by exposure to different animals and environments. Type AB, the youngest, emerged sometime in the last 1,000 to 1,500 years, probably from the intermingling of previously separated populations. Today, your blood type is a genetic inheritance, a rolled dice that came up one way instead of another when your parents' DNA combined. You can't change it. It's written into every cell that carries hemoglobin. But understanding it, really understanding what it means beyond the label, that opens a door into the hidden mechanics of your own body, the subtle advantages and vulnerabilities you've been carrying all along without realizing it. And that's exactly where we're headed next. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is a blood type, and why does it matter? You'd think something this fundamental would be obvious, written in textbooks for centuries, common knowledge, passed down like how to tie your shoes or boil water. But humanity spent most of its existence completely unaware that blood types existed at all. For thousands of years, blood was just blood, a mysterious red fluid that meant life when it stayed inside you and death when too much of it leaked out. No one suspected there were invisible categories, secret codes written on the surface of every red blood cell, determining whether a transfusion would save you or kill you in minutes. The story begins in Vienna, in the autumn of 1900, in a small laboratory where a 32-year-old pathologist named Karl Landsteiner was conducting what seemed like a simple experiment. Landsteiner was fascinated by the problem of blood transfusions, which at the time were desperate, last-resort gambles. Doctors had known since the 17th century that you could theoretically transfer blood from one person to another, but the results were horrifyingly unpredictable. Sometimes the patient rallied, color returning to their face, pulse strengthening. Sometimes they died screaming, their body convulsing as an invisible war erupted in their veins, red blood cells clumping together, blocking vessels, shutting down organs. No pattern, no explanation, just luck, bad or good. Landsteiner suspected the answer was in the blood itself, not in the technique or the amount transfused. So he collected samples from himself and 5 colleagues in his lab, separated the red blood cells from the liquid plasma, and began mixing them in different combinations on glass slides. Then he put them under a microscope and watched. What he saw changed everything. Some combinations looked normal. The red blood cells drifted separately, suspended in the plasma like tiny smooth discs. But other combinations were disasters. The cells clumped together instantly, forming sticky, dangerous clusters called agglutination. It happened consistently. The The same pairs of people always produce the same result. Landsteiner realized he was seeing something no one had ever understood before. There were types of blood, invisible differences that made some people compatible and others deadly to each other. He identified 3 types initially, which he labeled A, B, and C. Later, C was renamed O, from the German word ohne, meaning without, because type O blood lacks both A and B antigens. A 4th type, AB, was discovered shortly after by Landsteiner's students. The Rh factor, that positive or negative symbol, came later, in 1940, when Landsteiner and another researcher named Alexander Wiener were studying rhesus monkeys and discovered a different antigen that about 85% of humans carry. If you have it, you're Rh positive. If you don't, you're Rh negative. Together, these systems create the 8 main blood types we know today. But what are these types, really? At the molecular level, your blood type is determined by the shape of certain sugar molecules and proteins attached to the surface of your red blood cells. Think of your red blood cells as millions of tiny delivery trucks carrying oxygen through your body. On the surface of each truck, there are identification tags, molecular markers, called antigens that tell your immune system this belongs here. This is self, don't attack. Type A individuals have A antigens. Type B individuals have B antigens. Type AB individuals have both. And type O individuals have neither A nor B. Just a simpler baseline structure called the H antigen that the others are built upon. Your immune system is deeply invested in these tags. From early in your development, your body learns to recognize its own antigen pattern and produces antibodies against any antigen it doesn't have. If you're type A, your plasma contains anti-B antibodies, floating proteins shaped specifically to attack B antigens. If you're type B, you have anti-A antibodies. Type O people have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies, making their immune systems highly reactive to foreign blood. Type AB people, having both antigens, produce neither antibody, which is why they can receive blood from anyone without their immune system staging a revolt. This is why blood transfusions used to kill people. Imagine you're type A, and someone gives you type B blood. Your anti-B antibodies immediately recognize those foreign B antigens as invaders and attack. The donated red blood cells start clumping together, forming clusters that clog your smallest blood vessels. Your kidneys try to filter out the destroyed cells and become overwhelmed. You develop a fever, struggle to breathe, your blood pressure crashes. In severe cases, you die. Before Landsteiner, this happened regularly, and doctors had no idea why. They just knew that blood transfusions were dangerous, a last resort when death was already knocking. Now, here's the question that haunted scientists for decades after Landsteiner's discovery. Evolution doesn't keep traits around unless they do something useful, and having multiple incompatible blood types seems like a biological liability. Why didn't humanity just settle on one universal type that everyone could share? The answer, as usual with evolution, is disease. Blood types are ancient battlefield scars, genetic adaptations shaped by thousands of years of infections, parasites, and plagues. Different blood types offered different advantages against different threats, and the pathogens our ancestors faced determined which types became common in different parts of the world. Type O, the oldest, likely emerged over 1 million years ago in our pre-human ancestors. It's the baseline, the default pattern that the other types are variations of. Type O became dominant in early human populations, especially in Africa and among indigenous peoples of the Americas, likely because it provided significant protection against severe malaria. The malaria parasite, Plasmodium falciparum, has a harder time invading type O red blood cells. They're slightly different in shape and surface chemistry, less hospitable to the parasite. In regions where malaria killed millions of children before they could grow up and reproduce, having type O blood was a survival advantage. Over generations, the gene became more common. Type A appeared later, perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, as humans transitioned from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agricultural communities. Some researchers believe type A offered advantages in dense populations where new infectious diseases were spreading rapidly, person to person, in ways that had never been possible when humans lived in small, scattered bands. Type A immune systems respond differently to certain bacterial infections, possibly providing protection against diseases that thrived in early farming settlements. Today, type A is most common in Europe and Japan, places with long histories of high population density agriculture. Type B emerged somewhere between 10,000 and 25,000 years ago, concentrated in Central Asia and the Himalayas. The exact evolutionary pressure that favored type B is still debated, but it likely involved different pathogens, different diets, and different environmental challenges faced by nomadic herding populations. Type B is still most common in Asia and parts of Africa, less so in Europe and the Americas. Type AB, the rarest and youngest, probably emerged within the last 1,000 to 1,500 years from the mixing of previously separated populations carrying A and B genes. It's a hybrid, carrying both sets of antigens, and it exists at low frequencies almost everywhere. So when you look at a map of global blood type distribution, you're not seeing randomness, you're seeing history. You're seeing the fingerprints of malaria in Africa, agricultural diseases in Europe, nomadic adaptations in Asia. Every blood type persisted because it helped someone, somewhere, survive long enough to pass their genes forward. Your blood type is an inheritance from ancestors who faced threats you'll never encounter, carried forward into a world where those specific dangers have mostly vanished, but the genetic signature remains. Written in antigens, your immune system still guards jealously. And those signatures, as we'll see, still matter in ways both subtle and profound. Let's talk about type O. If you're type O, you're part of the oldest blood type club on Earth, carrying the baseline genetic pattern that every other blood type is essentially a modification of. Type O is ancient, primal, the default setting that dominated human populations for hundreds of thousands of years before agriculture, before cities, before humans even looked quite the way we do now. And if you've ever heard someone call type O the universal donor, that's not marketing. It's biochemistry. Type O blood can be given to almost anyone in an emergency because it lacks the A and B antigens that trigger immune reactions. Your red blood cells are neutral, anonymous, flying under the radar of other people's immune systems. But here's what most people don't realize. Being universal doesn't mean being ordinary. Type O bodies are wired differently, shaped by evolutionary pressures that favored aggression, quick reactions, and high-octane immune responses. Type O likely emerged more than 1 million years ago in our evolutionary ancestors, back when survival meant hunting, running, fighting, and avoiding becoming something else's dinner. Early humans with type O blood had immune systems tuned for a dangerous world full of parasites, infections, and predators. And that intensity, that biological readiness for threat, is still written into type O immune function today. If you're type O, your immune system tends to mount stronger inflammatory responses. When your body detects an infection or injury, it doesn't hesitate. It floods the area with immune cells, raises your temperature, triggers swelling, goes to war immediately and loudly. This is an advantage when facing acute infections, especially parasitic ones. Studies have shown that type O individuals are significantly more resistant to severe malaria than other blood types. And in regions of Africa, where malaria has been killing children for thousands of years, type O is by far the most common blood type, sometimes reaching 70% or more of the population. The reason comes down to red blood cell structure. Malaria parasites, specifically Plasmodium falciparum, invade red blood cells and reproduce inside them. But type O red blood cells are slightly different in shape and surface protein arrangement. They're less sticky, less likely to clump together in ways the parasite exploits. When a type O person is infected, their red blood cells are also more likely to be cleared quickly by the spleen before the parasite can multiply out of control. It's not perfect immunity. Type O people still get malaria, but they're far less likely to develop the severe, brain-damaging, life-threatening form of the disease. Over countless generations in malaria zones, this advantage was enormous. Children with type O blood survived. Children with type A or B were more likely to die young. The gene spread, generation after generation, until it dominated. But evolution is all about trade-offs, and the same immune intensity that protects type O individuals from malaria makes them more vulnerable to other problems. That strong inflammatory response, so useful against parasites, can backfire in a modern world where infectious diseases are less common but chronic inflammation is everywhere. Type O individuals have higher rates of stomach ulcers, often caused by a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. This bacteria secretes proteins that bind specifically to the H antigen, the baseline structure present on type O red blood cells. The bacteria essentially uses type O blood as a landing pad, colonizing the stomach lining more easily and causing more damage. Type A and B antigens seem to offer some protection, possibly by blocking the bacteria's attachment sites. Type O stomachs are more hospitable, more vulnerable. There's also a clotting issue. Type O blood has lower levels of a protein called von Willebrand factor, which helps blood clot properly when you're injured. If you're type O, your blood is thinner, more likely to flow freely, less likely to form dangerous clots in your veins and arteries. On one hand, this is protective. Type O individuals have significantly lower rates of heart attack and stroke compared to A, B, and AB types. Your blood doesn't clump and clog as easily. But on the other hand, you bleed more. If you're injured, your blood takes longer to clot. Surgeons know this. If you're type O and going into surgery, they prepare for slightly more blood loss. Historically, this probably wasn't a huge disadvantage. Injuries either killed you quickly or they didn't. But in modern contexts, where clotting disorders matter, type O stands out. Now let's talk about digestion, because type O bodies are optimized for a hunter-gatherer diet in ways that still echo today. If you're type O, you likely have higher levels of stomach acid compared to other blood types. Your digestive system is tuned for breaking down protein, specifically meat. Early humans with type O blood were eating what they could hunt or scavenge, high protein, high fat diets with relatively few carbohydrates. Their stomachs needed to be acidic, aggressive, capable of digesting tough animal tissue and killing pathogens that might be lurking in less than fresh meat. That high stomach acid is still there in modern type O individuals, which is why many type O people report feeling better, more energized, more satisfied when they eat protein-heavy meals. It's not psychology, it's biochemistry. Your stomach is built for it. But here's the flip side. That same high stomach acid makes type O individuals more prone to acid reflux, heartburn, and ulcers, especially when combined with stress or irregular eating patterns. The stomach is producing all this acid, ready to digest a big protein meal, but if you skip meals or eat mostly carbohydrates, that acid has nothing to work on. It starts irritating the stomach lining. Add in Helicobacter pylori, which loves type O tissue, and you've got a recipe for digestive discomfort. This doesn't mean type O people can't be healthy, vegetarians, or eat carbs. Plenty do just fine. But there's a reason some type O individuals instinctively crave meat and feel off when they avoid it for too long. There's also a thyroid connection. Type O individuals have slightly higher rates of hypothyroidism, a condition where the thyroid gland doesn't produce enough hormone, leading to fatigue, weight gain, sensitivity to cold, and sluggish metabolism. The exact mechanism isn't fully understood, but it may be related to autoimmune patterns. Type O immune systems, remember, are highly reactive, quick to sound alarms. Sometimes that reactivity misfires, attacking the body's own tissues, and the thyroid is a common target. It's not inevitable. Most type O people never develop thyroid problems, but the statistical trend is there, consistent across multiple studies. So what does it mean to be type O? It means your immune system is a warrior, fast to respond, powerful in acute situations, built for a world of parasites and infections. It means your digestion is optimized for protein, your stomach acid high, your gut expecting fuel it can break down aggressively. It means your blood is thinner, less likely to clot dangerously, but also slower to stop bleeding when you're cut. It means you carry the oldest genetic signature in the human lineage, the baseline pattern that dominated our species for most of its existence. And it means you've inherited both the strengths and vulnerabilities that came with surviving in a world very different from the one you live in now. But type O is just one story. Let's move on to type A, the blood of farmers, cultivators, and a very different kind of survival. If you're type A, you're carrying the blood of adaptation, the genetic signature that emerged when humans stopped chasing their food and started growing it. Somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 years ago, as the last ice age thawed and humans began planting seeds instead of following herds, a new blood type started appearing in agricultural communities across Europe and Asia. Type A wasn't a random mutation. It was a response, a biological shift that helped early farmers survive the strange new diseases that came with living in permanent settlements, sleeping in the same place every night, surrounded by hundreds or thousands of other humans in ways our species had never experienced before. And if you're type A today, you're still carrying the metabolic and immunological fingerprints of that ancient transition, written into how your body handles stress, digests food, and fights infections. Let's start with stress, because if you're type A, you probably know it intimately. Type A individuals have measurably higher baseline levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone your body releases when it perceives threat or pressure. Cortisol isn't inherently bad. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning, sharpens your focus when you need it, mobilizes energy when danger appears. But type A bodies seem to produce it more readily and clear it more slowly. Your stress response is like a smoke alarm that's slightly too sensitive, quick to go off, slow to reset. This isn't weakness, it's biology. and it likely emerged as an advantage in early agricultural societies where planning, vigilance, and attention to detail meant the difference between a successful harvest and starvation. Imagine you're a farmer 10,000 years ago. You can't just move to a new hunting ground if food runs out. You're committed to this plot of land, these crops, this season's weather. You need to remember when to plant, when to harvest, how to store grain so it doesn't rot, how to manage water, how to watch for pests and blights. You need to cooperate with your neighbors, negotiate shared resources, avoid conflict in close quarters. A nervous system tuned for alertness, for noticing problems early, for staying vigilant, that's an asset. Type A individuals, with their elevated cortisol and sensitive stress chemistry, were probably better farmers. They worried more, planned more, noticed threats before they became catastrophic. Over generations in agricultural communities, the gene became more common. But in the modern world, that same biology can feel like a burden. If you're type A, you might notice you have a harder time shutting off your mind at night. You replay conversations, worry about tomorrow's tasks. Wake up at 3 in the morning with your heart racing over something that objectively isn't that urgent. You might feel anxious more often than your type O or B friends, more prone to perfectionism, more likely to internalize stress instead of expressing it. This isn't personality, it's cortisol. Your body is doing what it evolved to do, staying alert, scanning for problems, keeping you vigilant. But there's no harvest to plan anymore, no seasonal crisis that justifies the alarm, just modern life, which never stops generating reasons to worry. Type A sleep patterns reflect this. Studies have found that Type A individuals often have more fragmented sleep, waking more frequently during the night, spending less time in deep restorative stages. The elevated cortisol doesn't fully drop the way it should after dark. Your nervous system stays partially activated, ready to respond, never fully surrendering to rest. If you're Type A and struggle with insomnia or wake up feeling unrested despite spending 8 hours in bed, this might be part of why. Your biology is fighting relaxation, holding on to just enough tension to keep you vigilant, even when there's nothing to be vigilant about. Now, let's talk digestion, because Type A stomachs are the opposite of Type O. Where Type O individuals have high stomach acid built for digesting meat, Type A individuals have lower acid levels, gentler, less aggressive digestive chemistry. This makes sense evolutionarily. Early farmers weren't eating much meat. They were eating grains, beans, vegetables, fermented foods, occasional dairy. Their digestive systems adapted to handle carbohydrates efficiently, breaking down starches and fibers instead of animal protein. If you're Type A, you probably digest grains and plant-based foods more easily than heavy steaks. Your gut bacteria populations are different too, skewed towards species that ferment carbohydrates rather than protein. This is why many Type A individuals report feeling lighter, more energized, less sluggish on plant-forward diets. It's not morality or trendiness, it's that your stomach is biochemically suited for it. But Type A digestion has vulnerabilities. Lower stomach acid means you're less able to sterilize your food. Your stomach is a less hostile environment for bacteria that might enter through what you eat or drink. This might be one reason Type A individuals have higher rates of stomach cancer, particularly in regions where Helicobacter pylori infection is common. The bacteria colonizes more easily in less acidic environments, burrows into the stomach lining, causes chronic inflammation that over decades can turn precancerous. Type A individuals also produce more mucus in their digestive tracts, which sounds protective, but actually provides a breeding ground for certain bacteria. It's another trade-off. The mucus helps with digesting plant fibers, but it also creates niches where problematic microbes can hide. Immune-wise, Type A bodies are more strategic, less explosive than Type O. Instead of mounting immediate, aggressive inflammatory responses, Type A immune systems tend to respond more slowly, more carefully, with more regulation. This might have been useful in dense farming communities where overactive immune responses could trigger autoimmune issues or allergic reactions to environmental triggers that were suddenly constant: dust from grain stores, pollen from fields, animal dander from livestock kept close to homes. Type A immune systems learned restraint, which protected against some problems but created vulnerability to others. Type A individuals are more susceptible to certain viral infections, particularly influenza and norovirus, possibly because their immune response doesn't ramp up fast enough to contain the initial viral replication. There's also a cardiovascular consideration. Type A blood is thicker than Type O, containing higher levels of clotting factors and von Willebrand factor. This makes sense for farmers who needed blood that clotted efficiently after injuries, cuts from tools, wounds from accidents that were common in agricultural work. But in modern sedentary life, thicker blood is a liability. Type A individuals have higher rates of heart disease and stroke compared to Type O. The blood is more likely to clot inappropriately inside vessels, blocking arteries that feed the heart or brain. Cholesterol levels also tend to run higher in Type A individuals, though diet and lifestyle still matter far more than genetics. The point is, your blood chemistry leans toward thickness, and in a world where most of us sit far more than we move, that's something to be mindful of. Personality research, the kind done rigorously in laboratories rather than internet quizzes, has found subtle but real correlations between Type A blood and certain psychological traits. Type A individuals score slightly higher on measures of conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They're more likely to plan ahead, follow rules, seek harmony, and yes, worry. Again, this isn't destiny. Plenty of Type A people are spontaneous and carefree, but on average, across large populations, the trend exists. It's likely mediated by cortisol, by stress chemistry, by the way Type A nervous systems are wired to notice problems and respond with caution rather than aggression. So what does it mean to be Type A? It means your body is built for a world of cultivation, planning, cooperation, and vigilance. It means your stress response is finely tuned, perhaps too finely for modern chaos. It means your digestion prefers plants over meat, your immune system favors strategy over brute force, and your blood runs thicker, more prone to clotting. It means you carry the legacy of farmers who survived by noticing danger early, by staying alert, by cooperating in close quarters. And it means the strengths that kept your ancestors alive might sometimes feel like burdens in a world that no longer rewards constant vigilance. But there are other stories still to tell, other blood types shaped by entirely different worlds. If you're Type B, you're carrying the blood of nomads, wanderers, herders who lived between the settled world of farmers and the hunting grounds of ancient humans. Type B emerged somewhere between 10,000 and 25,000 years ago. Not in the river valleys where agriculture was taking root, but in the highlands and steppes of Central Asia, the Himalayas, the vast grasslands where survival meant mobility, adaptability, and a fundamentally different relationship with the environment. Type B individuals weren't planting crops in the same soil year after year. They were moving with seasons, following animals, living in smaller groups, adapting to temperature extremes and unpredictable resources. And that lifestyle, that constant need for flexibility, is still written into type B biology today, into immune systems that balance aggression and restraint, digestive systems that handle an unusually wide range of foods, and stress responses that recover faster than type A but spike harder than type O. The geographical distribution of type B tells the story. It's most common in Central and Northern Asia, parts of India, the Middle East, and scattered populations across Africa. In Europe and the Americas, it's much rarer, sometimes less than 10% of the population. This isn't random. Type B thrived in populations that live nomadically, moving between ecosystems, exposed to different pathogens, different climates, different food sources depending on the season. The gene likely spread along ancient migration routes, carried by herding cultures who domesticated horses, yaks, camels, and goats, and lived in close contact with animals in ways that agricultural and hunter-gatherer populations didn't. One of the most distinctive features of type B blood is its relationship with dairy. If you're type B, your body is more likely to tolerate and efficiently digest milk, cheese, yogurt, and other dairy products compared to type A or type O individuals. This makes perfect evolutionary sense. Nomadic herders relied on their animals not just for meat and labor, but for milk, a renewable resource that could sustain them through harsh winters and dry seasons. Over thousands of years, populations that could digest dairy had a survival advantage. They could extract more calories, more nutrition, from the same animals. Type B bodies developed higher levels of the enzyme lactase, which breaks down lactose, the sugar, in milk. Most adult humans lose the ability to produce lactase after childhood, but type B populations retained it at much higher rates. This doesn't mean every type B person loves dairy or tolerates it perfectly. Genetics isn't destiny, but on average, type B individuals report fewer digestive issues with milk products. If you're type B and you've always been able to drink a glass of milk without discomfort, while your type A or O friends complain about bloating and cramps, this is part of why your ancestors were milking goats on a mountainside 3,000 years ago, and your digestive system still remembers. Type B immune systems are somewhere between the aggressive reactivity of type O and the cautious strategy of type A. Type B bodies mount strong immune responses when needed, but they also have more regulatory mechanisms, more checks and balances that prevent the immune system from overreacting. This flexibility was probably an advantage for populations moving between environments, exposed to different pathogens in different regions. A nomad traveling from high-altitude grasslands to lowland river valleys would encounter new bacteria, new parasites, new viral strains, an immune system that could adapt quickly, ramp up when necessary, and calm down when the threat passed. That was valuable. But this flexibility has a cost. Type B individuals have higher rates of certain autoimmune conditions, diseases where the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own tissues. Lupus, multiple sclerosis, and chronic fatigue syndrome all show slightly elevated rates in type B populations. The same immune versatility that helps fight diverse infections can sometimes misfire, confusing self for non-self. It's another evolutionary trade-off. The immune system that saved your ancestors from infections they encountered while moving across continents might occasionally turn on your own joints, nerves, or connective tissue in a modern world where those specific threats no longer exist. Type B individuals also have a unique relationship with certain bacterial infections. Research has found that type B blood offers some resistance to infections like E. coli and Salmonella, possibly because the B antigen structure interferes with how these bacteria attach to cells. But type B is more vulnerable to other infections, particularly pneumonia and certain strains of Streptococcus. The bacteria seem to exploit the B antigen as an entry point, binding to it more effectively than they can to A or O cells. So type B immunity isn't universally stronger or weaker. It's specialized, shaped by the specific threats nomadic populations faced most often. Now let's talk about stress, because type B stress chemistry is fascinating. Type B individuals have cortisol responses that sit somewhere between type O and type A. You're not as constantly vigilant as type A. Your baseline cortisol is lower. You don't carry that same humming background anxiety. But when stress does hit, your cortisol spikes sharply, sometimes even higher than type A in acute situations. The difference is recovery. Type B bodies clear cortisol faster. Your stress response is intense but brief. You react strongly, then let it go. This pattern makes sense for nomadic life. You need to respond decisively to immediate threats, a predator, a sudden storm, a conflict over resources, but you can't afford to stay stressed for days. You're moving, adapting, shifting focus. Chronic worry would be a liability. In modern life, this means type B individuals often report feeling stressed in bursts rather than constantly. You might have intense anxiety before a deadline or a difficult conversation, your heart racing, cortisol flooding. But once it's over, you bounce back relatively quickly. You don't ruminate the way type A individuals do. You don't replay the stressful event for days. You move on. This is generally protective for long-term health. Chronic stress is more damaging than acute stress, and type B bodies are better at avoiding the chronic kind. But it also means you might underestimate how stressed you actually were in the moment. Because you recover so quickly, you forget how intense it felt. Sleep quality in type B individuals tends to be moderately good, better than type A on average, not quite as deep as type O. You fall asleep reasonably well, assuming you're not in the middle of an acute stress spike, and you don't wake as frequently as type A. But you might notice your sleep is more variable, more dependent on what happened that day. If you had a stressful event in the evening, your cortisol might still be elevated when you try to sleep, making it harder to drift off. But on calm days, you sleep easily, deeply, without much effort. Your nervous system doesn't hold on to tension the way type A does, but it's also more reactive in the moment than type O. Type B blood also has clotting characteristics similar to type A and AB, meaning it's thicker than type O. You have higher levels of von Willebrand factor and other clotting proteins, which means your blood clots more efficiently when you're injured, but also puts you at slightly higher risk for inappropriate clotting inside vessels. Heart disease and stroke rates in type B individuals fall between type O, which has the lowest risk, and type A and AB, which have the highest. It's not dramatic, but it's measurable. Your blood prefers to clot, and in sedentary modern life, that preference can become a problem. Personality-wise, type B individuals often score higher on openness and extroversion in psychological assessments. They're more likely to seek new experiences, adapt to change easily, and feel comfortable in social situations. Again, this aligns with nomadic heritage. If your ancestors survived by moving, trading, negotiating with different groups, encountering new environments regularly, then a personality that embraces novelty rather than fearing it would be an advantage. Type B individuals are often described as balanced, flexible, neither as intense as type O nor as cautious as type A. It's not universal, but the trend shows up consistently across studies. So what does it mean to be type B? It means your body is built for flexibility, for moving between worlds, for adapting to change. It means your immune system is versatile, but sometimes too clever for its own good. It means you handle dairy better than most, stress in bursts rather than waves, and novelty with curiosity rather than fear. You carry the blood of herders who survived by never staying still too long, by learning from every new landscape, by balancing independence with cooperation, and you're still carrying those adaptations, for better and worse, in a world that no longer requires migration but still rewards flexibility. Next, we turn to the rarest, the youngest, the most enigmatic blood type of all. If you're type AB, you're rare, not just uncommon, genuinely rare. Less than 5% of the global population carries AB blood, and in some regions, it's closer to 1%. You're the youngest blood type, the newest addition to the human genetic catalogue, emerging sometime within the last 1,000 to 1,500 years from the intermingling of populations that had been separated for millennia. Type AB didn't evolve in response to a specific environment or pathogen the way O, A, and B did. It emerged from contact, from trade routes and migrations that brought A and B genes together in the same individuals. And because of that hybrid origin, type AB biology is contradictory, unpredictable, carrying both the strengths and vulnerabilities of its parent types in combinations that don't always make sense. Genetically, if you're type AB, you inherited an A gene from one parent and a B gene from the other. Your red blood cells carry both A and B antigens on their surface, which is why you're called the universal receiver. Your immune system recognizes both antigens as self, so it doesn't produce antibodies against either. You can receive blood from anyone, A, B, A, or O, without your body staging a revolt. In an emergency, that's a massive advantage. But it also means your immune system is more tolerant, less aggressive, less likely to sound alarms even when maybe it should. Type AB immune systems are strange hybrids. You inherit some of the strategic, slower response patterns of type A and some of the flexible, adaptable patterns of type B. In theory, this should give you the best of both worlds. In practice, it often means you're caught between them, neither fully benefiting from type A's careful regulation nor type B's versatile reactivity. Type AB individuals have higher rates of certain infections, particularly respiratory viruses and gastrointestinal bugs, possibly because the immune system doesn't mount strong initial defenses. It waits, assesses, sometimes too long. By the time your immune response fully kicks in, the virus or bacteria has already established itself. But there are advantages too. Type AB individuals have lower rates of some allergies and autoimmune conditions compared to type B, possibly because the presence of both A and B antigens creates a more balanced immune environment. Your immune system is less likely to overreact to harmless environmental triggers like pollen or pet dander. It's learned tolerance from birth, recognizing two different antigen patterns as safe, and that broader recognition might extend to other molecules. It's speculative, the research is still emerging, but the pattern is there. Digestive-wise, type AB is a compromise. You inherited type A's lower stomach acid, which makes digesting heavy animal protein harder, but you also inherited type B's ability to handle dairy, which type A struggles with. So, your digestive system is neither strongly carnivorous like type O nor purely plant-optimized like type A. You're somewhere in the middle, able to handle a wider variety of foods but not perfectly suited to any of them. Many type AB individuals report that their digestion is unpredictable, fine one day, uncomfortable the next, sensitive to combinations of foods rather than specific items. A steak alone might sit fine, dairy alone might be tolerable, but steak and cheese together, and suddenly you're bloated and sluggish. It's the hybrid chemistry. Two different digestive profiles trying to work simultaneously. Type AB individuals also inherit the thick blood characteristic of both A and B. Your blood has high levels of von Willebrand factor, clotting factors, proteins that make your blood more viscous, more likely to clot. This is where type AB faces one of its biggest health challenges. You have the highest risk of all blood types for stroke and heart attack. The blood is thick, prone to clotting inappropriately, and in modern sedentary life where most of us move far less than our ancestors, that thickness becomes dangerous. Studies have found that type AB individuals are 82% more likely to develop cognitive decline and memory problems as they age, possibly because of reduced blood flow to the brain over time. Thick blood doesn't deliver oxygen as efficiently. Small vessels get clogged more easily. Over decades, that adds up. There's also a cancer consideration. Type AB individuals have slightly elevated risks for stomach and pancreatic cancers, inheriting vulnerabilities from both type A, which has high stomach cancer rates, and the general non-O pattern of higher cancer risk overall. The mechanisms aren't fully clear, but they likely involve chronic inflammation, blood thickness affecting tissue oxygenation, and possibly the way AB immune systems respond to early precancerous cells. Again, these are statistical risks, not certainties. Most type AB people never develop these diseases, but the trends exist, consistent across large population studies. Stress chemistry in type AB individuals is also a hybrid, and not always in helpful ways. You inherit type A's tendency toward elevated baseline cortisol, that humming background stress that makes it harder to fully relax. But you also inherit type B's sharp cortisol spikes in response to acute stress. So you're somewhat anxious at baseline like type A, but you also react intensely in the moment like type B. It's a double burden. You don't get type B's fast recovery or type O's resilience. You get type A's chronic vigilance, plus type B's intense reactivity, which can feel exhausting. Many type AB individuals report feeling emotionally drained more easily than their friends, needing more downtime to recover from social or professional stress. Sleep quality in type AB individuals is often the most fragmented of all blood types. You combine type A's difficulty shutting off the mind with type B's variable sleep depending on daily stress. If you're type AB, you might recognize this pattern. Some nights you fall asleep easily and sleep deeply, and other nights you lie awake for hours, mind racing, unable to find the off switch. There's no clear predictor. It's not always tied to how stressful your day was or what you ate. It feels random, unpredictable, frustrating. This variability is likely tied to your hybrid stress chemistry. Your cortisol doesn't follow a clean pattern. It's influenced by both A-type chronic elevation and B-type acute spikes, and depending on which system is more active on a given night, your sleep quality changes. Personality research on type AB is limited because the population is so small, but what exists suggests a pattern of contradiction. Type AB individuals often score high on both introversion and extroversion, depending on context. You're socially adaptable, able to be outgoing when needed, but craving solitude to recharge. You're both rational and emotional, analytical and intuitive, often feeling pulled in two directions. This makes sense if you think about the biology. You're literally carrying two sets of instructions: Type A's cautious strategic wiring and Type B's flexible adaptive wiring, and they don't always agree. It's not a disorder, it's just complexity, the natural result of being a genetic hybrid. One interesting finding: Type AB individuals have been found to have better immune memory in some studies, meaning once you've been exposed to a pathogen, your body remembers it more effectively and responds faster if you encounter it again. This might be because you're carrying immune recognition proteins from both A and B, giving you a broader library of past threats to reference. It's a subtle advantage, but in a world of vaccines and repeated exposures to seasonal viruses, it might matter. So, what does it mean to be Type AB? It means you're a biological experiment, a recent fusion of two ancient blood types, carrying both their gifts and their burdens in unpredictable combinations. It means your body doesn't fit neatly into any category. Your health risks are complex, your stress response is contradictory, your sleep variable. You're the universal receiver, tolerant and adaptable, but that tolerance comes with vulnerabilities. You're rare, less than 5%, carrying blood that didn't exist when empires rose and fell, when cathedrals were built, when explorers crossed oceans. You're new, evolutionarily speaking, and maybe still figuring out how to exist, but rarity isn't weakness. It's just difference, written in antigens most of the world doesn't carry. And next, we'll explore the other mystery, the one that crosses all blood types and still baffles scientists. Now let's talk about the Rh factor, that positive or negative symbol that follows your blood type like a genetic footnote. If you've ever looked at your blood type card and seen A positive or O negative, that second part, the positive or negative, refers to something completely separate from the ABO system. It's a different protein, a different genetic inheritance, and in some ways, it's even stranger than the blood type itself. The Rh factor is named after rhesus monkeys, the animals in which it was first discovered back in 1938 by Karl Landsteiner, the same scientist who identified the ABO system, working with Alexander Wiener. They were injecting rhesus monkey blood into rabbits and guinea pigs to study immune responses when they discovered a new antigen, a protein on red blood cells that some humans had and others didn't. If you have it, you're H positive. If you don't, you're Rh negative. And that distinction, presence or absence of a single protein, has consequences that range from pregnancy complications to bizarre conspiracy theories about alien ancestry. About 85% of humans are AH positive. The protein is there, coded into your DNA, expressed on every red blood cell you produce. 15% are AH negative, missing the protein entirely, but the distribution isn't even. AH negative blood is concentrated heavily in Europe, particularly among people of Basque descent in northern Spain and southern France, where rates can reach 35% or higher. In Africa and Asia, Rh negative is rare, sometimes less than 1% of the population. This uneven distribution has led to decades of speculation about where Rh negative blood came from, why it exists, and whether it represents something fundamentally different about those who carry it. The most scientifically accepted explanation is that Rh negative is simply a recessive genetic trait, a variant that emerged somewhere in human populations tens of thousands of years ago and persisted in isolated groups, particularly in Europe, where geographic barriers like mountains and seas limited genetic mixing. The Basque people, living in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, maintained one of the most isolated gene pools in Europe for thousands of years, rarely intermarrying with surrounding populations. In that isolation, Rh negative became common simply through genetic drift, the random fluctuation of gene frequencies in small populations. There's no evidence it provided a survival advantage or emerged in response to a specific environmental pressure. It just happened to be there, and in isolated groups, it stuck around. But here's where it gets medically important. If you're Rh negative and you're ever exposed to Rh positive blood, your immune system will recognize that Rh protein as foreign and produce antibodies against it. This is fine if it only happens once. Your body makes a note, files it away, no immediate harm. But if it happens again, those antibodies will attack any Rh positive blood cells they encounter, destroying them rapidly. This becomes a serious problem during pregnancy. If an Rh negative woman is pregnant with an Rh positive baby, which can happen if the father is Rh positive, the baby's blood carries a protein the mother's immune system doesn't recognize. During pregnancy, and especially during delivery, small amounts of the baby's blood can cross into the mother's bloodstream. Her immune system detects the foreign Rh protein and starts producing antibodies. In a first pregnancy, this usually isn't a crisis. The antibodies develop slowly, often not until late in pregnancy or after birth, so the baby is usually born healthy. But those antibodies stay in the mother's system, waiting. If she gets pregnant again with another Rh positive baby, the antibodies are already there, ready to attack. They cross the placenta into the baby's bloodstream and start destroying the baby's red blood cells, a condition called hemolytic disease of the newborn. The baby becomes anemic, jaundiced, starved of oxygen. In severe cases, it's fatal. Before modern medicine, Rh incompatibility killed or damaged countless babies, and mothers often didn't understand why their first child was fine, but subsequent pregnancies ended in tragedy. The solution, developed in the 1960s, is a shot called RhoGAM, an injection of Rh antibodies given to Rh negative mothers during and after pregnancy with an Rh positive baby. The injected antibodies destroy any fetal blood cells that crossed into the mother's circulation before her immune system can react and produce its own antibodies. It's a clever trick, essentially preventing the mother's body from learning to recognize Rh-positive blood as a threat. RhoGAM has saved millions of lives and turned Rh incompatibility from a devastating problem into a manageable one. But only if the mother knows she's Rh negative and receives the treatment. Even today, in places without access to modern prenatal care, Rh incompatibility remains a danger. Now, beyond pregnancy, does being Rh negative offer any other biological advantages or disadvantages? The research is limited, but there are hints. Some studies suggest Rh negative individuals have slightly higher resistance to certain parasitic infections, particularly toxoplasmosis, a parasite carried by cats that infects a huge percentage of the global population, usually without symptoms. The mechanism isn't clear, but it may have something to do with how the parasite interacts with red blood cell surfaces. Rh-negative cells might be slightly less hospitable, harder for the parasite to invade or manipulate. This wouldn't be a dramatic advantage. Toxoplasmosis rarely causes serious disease in healthy people, but over evolutionary time, even small advantages can influence gene frequency. There's also some intriguing research suggesting Rh-negative individuals may have slightly different immune responses overall, not just to Rh-positive blood, but to infections and inflammation in general. Some studies have found that Rh-negative people have lower levels of certain inflammatory markers, suggesting their immune systems might be less prone to chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that contributes to heart disease, diabetes, and aging. Other studies have found the opposite, that Rh-negative individuals have more reactive immune systems in some contexts. The truth is, we don't fully understand what the Rh protein does beyond its role in blood compatibility. It's on red blood cells, but red blood cells don't have nuclei or immune functions, so why is this protein there at all? What evolutionary purpose did it serve? We're still figuring it out. And then there are the conspiracy theories, because of course there are. The unusual concentration of Rh-negative blood in Europe, combined with the pregnancy complications it causes, has led some people to speculate wildly about its origins. The most persistent theory is that Rh-negative blood isn't fully human, that it represents genetic contamination from extraterrestrials or a lost ancient civilization. Proponents point to the fact that Rh-positive blood is found in other primates, linking us to our evolutionary ancestors, but Rh-negative seems to have no clear animal origin. They argue this makes Rh-negative people fundamentally different, alien hybrids or descendants of Atlanteans or Nephilim, depending on which version of the story you're hearing. The scientific response is simple. Rh-negative is just a recessive mutation, a genetic variant that emerged naturally and persisted in isolated populations. It's not evidence of alien ancestry any more than blue eyes or red hair are. Mutations happen constantly in evolution. Most disappear. Some stick around, either because they provide an advantage, because they're neutral and drift randomly, or because they're trapped in small, isolated populations. Rh-negative is almost certainly the last category, a genetic quirk that became common in Europe through isolation and chance, not through extraterrestrial intervention. But the mystery of why it causes such severe pregnancy complications, why evolution didn't weed it out in populations where it was common, that's a real question. The answer probably lies in the relatively recent development of modern obstetrics. Before the last few centuries, infant mortality was so high from so many causes that incompatibility was just one risk among many. It wasn't a strong enough selective pressure to eliminate the gene. So, what does it mean to be Rh-negative? That causes specific pregnancy complications if unmanaged, and that might, possibly, offer subtle advantages against certain infections. It means you can only receive Rh-negative blood, which can be a challenge in emergencies since you're in the minority. And it means you're the subject of endlessly creative speculation from people who think your blood makes you special in ways science hasn't confirmed. But our Rh factor, positive or negative, is just one piece of a much larger biological puzzle. And that puzzle extends beyond antigens and antibodies into the unseen world living inside you, shaped by your blood type in ways you've probably never considered. Your blood type doesn't just determine which blood you can receive in an emergency or how your immune system recognizes threats. It also shapes the invisible ecosystem living inside your digestive tract, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other microbes that colonize your gut from birth and influence everything from your mood to your metabolism to how well you sleep at night. This is your microbiome, and it's not random. The specific species that thrive in your intestines, the ratios between different bacterial families, the metabolic byproducts they produce, all of this is influenced by your blood type in ways scientists are only beginning to understand. And because your gut microbiome is one of the most powerful regulators of sleep quality, inflammation, and mental health, understanding this connection matters more than you might think. Here's the basic mechanism. The same antigens that sit on the surface of your red blood cells, those A and B proteins that define your blood type, are also expressed on the cells lining your intestines. Your gut is covered in them, molecular flags that signal your blood type to anything living or passing through. Bacteria can detect these antigens. Some bacterial species have evolved to bind to specific antigens, using them as attachment sites to colonize the gut lining. Other bacteria are repelled by certain antigens or simply can't compete as well in an environment dominated by a particular antigen type. The result is that your blood type acts as a filter, favoring some bacterial species and discouraging others, shaping the microbial community that calls your gut home. If you're type O, your gut is dominated by bacteria that specialize in breaking down protein and fat. Remember, type O digestive systems evolved for high-protein, meat-heavy diets, and the bacteria that thrive in type O guts reflect that. Species like Bacteroides and certain strains of Clostridium are more common in type O individuals. These bacteria are excellent at fermenting amino acids, the building blocks of protein, and producing short-chain fatty acids as byproducts, molecules that reduce inflammation and support gut barrier integrity. This is part of why type O individuals often feel better, more energized, more satisfied when they eat protein-rich meals. It's not just the stomach acid, it's also that the bacterial populations are optimized to extract maximum nutrition from those foods. But there's a downside. When protein-fermenting bacteria dominate, and you're not eating enough protein, they start breaking down other available substrates, sometimes including the mucus layer that protects your intestinal lining. This can lead to increased gut permeability, often called leaky gut, where larger molecules that should stay inside the intestines cross into the bloodstream, triggering inflammation. Type O individuals who eat mostly carbohydrates and not enough protein may experience more digestive discomfort, bloating, irregular bowel movements, because their bacterial populations aren't getting what they evolved to process. If you're type A, your gut bacteria are different. You have higher populations of species like Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, bacteria that excel at fermenting carbohydrates, particularly complex starches and fibers from plants. These bacteria produce different metabolic byproducts, including lactic acid and certain B vitamins that support nervous system function and neurotransmitter production. This is part of why type A individuals often report feeling better on plant-forward diets. Your bacterial populations are built for it, optimized to extract nutrients from grains, vegetables, legumes. When you eat these foods, your gut bacteria thrive, producing compounds that reduce inflammation, support serotonin production, and promote stable blood sugar, all of which improve sleep quality. Type A microbiomes also tend to have higher populations of bacteria that produce a compound called butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that's incredibly important for gut and brain health. Butyrate is the preferred fuel for the cells lining your colon, and it also crosses into the bloodstream and influences brain function, reducing neuroinflammation and supporting the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that helps neurons grow and form new connections. Higher butyrate production is associated with better mood, better cognitive function, and deeper, more restorative sleep. So if you're type A and you eat a diet rich in fiber, you're feeding bacteria that produce a compound your brain needs to function well and sleep deeply. Type B individuals have the most diverse microbiomes, reflecting their evolutionary history of dietary flexibility. You have moderate populations of both protein-fermenting and carbohydrate-fermenting bacteria. along with unique species that are rare in other blood types. One notable difference is that type B guts have higher levels of bacteria that can break down lactose, the sugar in dairy, even into adulthood. This is why type B individuals tolerate dairy better. It's not just enzyme production in your own cells. It's also that your gut bacteria help with the digestion, breaking down lactose into simpler sugars that don't cause bloating or discomfort. Type B microbiomes also tend to have higher populations of bacteria that modulate immune function, producing compounds that calm overactive immune responses. This might be part of why type B individuals, despite having some autoimmune vulnerabilities, also have lower rates of certain allergies. Your gut bacteria are producing signals that tell your immune system to stay calm, to tolerate more, to react less aggressively to harmless triggers. This microbial immune regulation also affects sleep, because inflammation is one of the primary disruptors of deep sleep. If your gut bacteria are keeping inflammation low, you're more likely to reach and maintain the slow-wave sleep stages where your body repairs tissue, consolidates memories, and clears metabolic waste from your brain. Type AB microbiomes are, predictably, complicated. You inherit bacterial preferences from both type A and type B, which means your gut can support a wide range of species, but they don't always work together harmoniously. Some type AB individuals have very diverse, stable microbiomes that handle almost any diet. Others have unstable, unpredictable populations that shift dramatically based on what they eat, leading to inconsistent digestion and energy levels. This instability might contribute to the variable sleep quality many type AB individuals experience. Your gut bacteria populations are fluctuating more than other blood types, and because gut bacteria produce neurotransmitter precursors and inflammatory signals that directly affect your brain, those fluctuations translate into inconsistent sleep. Now here's where it gets especially relevant for sleep. Your gut bacteria produce or influence the production of several key compounds that regulate your sleep-wake cycle. One is serotonin. About 90% of your body's serotonin, the neurotransmitter that regulates mood, appetite, and sleep, is produced in your gut, not your brain. Gut bacteria don't make serotonin directly, but they produce metabolites that your intestinal cells use as building blocks. If your microbiome is healthy and balanced, producing the right metabolites, you make more serotonin. That serotonin gets converted at night into melatonin, the hormone that tells your brain it's time to sleep. So, a healthy gut microbiome, shaped partly by your blood type, directly supports your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. Gut bacteria also produce gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, a neurotransmitter that calms brain activity and promotes relaxation. Certain bacterial species, particularly Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, both common in type A guts, are especially good at producing GABA. If you're type A and you eat enough fiber to feed these bacteria, you're essentially supporting your body's natural production of a calming neurotransmitter. This is one reason why type A individuals who eat well often report feeling calmer, less anxious, better able to wind down at night. Conversely, if your microbiome is unbalanced, dominated by inflammatory bacterial species or lacking diversity, you'll produce fewer of these beneficial compounds and more inflammatory ones. Lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, is a molecule released by certain bacteria when they die, and it's highly inflammatory. If LPS crosses from your gut into your bloodstream, it triggers immune responses that increase cortisol, disrupt sleep architecture, and make it harder to reach deep sleep. Type O individuals, with their protein-fermenting bacteria, can have higher LPS levels if they're not eating enough protein, because their bacteria get stressed and start dying off. Type A individuals can have higher LPS if they eat too much animal fat and not enough fiber, because it shifts their bacterial populations toward inflammatory species. So your blood type influences which bacteria colonize your gut. Those bacteria influence what compounds get produced, and those compounds directly affect your brain, your stress hormones, and your ability to sleep well. It's a chain of influence that starts with antigens on your intestinal cells and ends with how rested you feel in the morning. And understanding it means recognizing that sleep isn't just about what happens in your brain or how much stress you're under. It's also about what's happening in your gut, 30 feet of intestine where trillions of microbes are working, producing signals that shape your biology in ways you never consciously perceive. And next, we'll look at how blood type influences your vulnerability to the infections that have shaped human history and continue to challenge us today. Your blood type has been at war for thousands of years, and you probably never knew it. Not a war you chose, not a conflict you can see, but an ancient, ongoing struggle between your immune system and the pathogens that have shaped human evolution more than any other force. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, they don't attack randomly. They have preferences, molecular keys, they've evolved to unlock specific cells, and those keys often depend on the antigens sitting on your red blood cells and the cells lining your organs. Some blood types are more resistant to certain infections, others are more vulnerable. And understanding these patterns helps explain why certain diseases devastated some populations but left others relatively unscathed, why your ancestors survived plagues that killed millions, and why even today, your blood type might influence how sick you get from infections most people don't think twice about. Let's start with malaria, because it's one of the clearest examples of how blood type shaped human survival. Malaria, caused by Plasmodium parasites transmitted by mosquitoes, has killed more humans than any other disease in history. Even today, it kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, mostly children in sub-Saharan Africa, but not everyone is equally vulnerable. Type O individuals have significant protection against severe malaria, the kind that causes brain damage, organ failure, and death. The parasite can still infect type O red blood cells, but those cells are less sticky, less likely to clump together and block small blood vessels in the brain and other vital organs. Type O blood also gets cleared from circulation faster when infected, limiting the parasite's ability to reproduce and spread. This protection is so significant that in regions where malaria has been endemic for thousands of years, type O became the dominant blood type, sometimes reaching 70 or 80% of the population. Natural selection was brutal and efficient. Children with type A or type B blood were more likely to die from severe malaria before reaching reproductive age. Children with type O survived, grew up, had children of their own, passed on the O gene. Over hundreds of generations, the population shifted. Today, if you're of African descent and you have type O blood, you're carrying a genetic inheritance that saved your ancestors from one of humanity's deadliest enemies. But evolution always involves trade-offs, and type O's advantage against malaria comes with a vulnerability to cholera. Cholera, caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, is a severe diarrheal disease that spreads through contaminated water. The bacteria produce a toxin that binds to intestinal cells, and it binds most effectively to cells carrying the H antigen, the baseline structure present in type O individuals. Type O people infected with cholera experience more severe symptoms, more fluid loss, higher mortality rates. In historical cholera outbreaks, type O individuals died at significantly higher rates than A, B, or AB. So, type O blood protects you from malaria but makes you more vulnerable to cholera. In regions where malaria was common but cholera was rare, type O thrived. In regions where cholera outbreaks were frequent, type O became less common over time. Plague. The Black Death that killed a third of Europe's population in the 14th century also showed blood type patterns. Research on ancient DNA from plague victims suggests that type O individuals were more vulnerable to Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague. The bacteria seem to exploit the H antigen, just like cholera does, using it to invade cells and evade immune responses. Meanwhile, type A and type B individuals had slightly better survival rates, possibly because their different antigen structures interfered with the bacteria's attachment mechanisms. This might be part of why type A became more common in Europe after the plague. The disease killed disproportionately more type O individuals, shifting the genetic balance of the surviving population. Smallpox, another historical killer, showed the opposite pattern. Type A and type AB individuals were more vulnerable to severe smallpox infections, possibly because the virus exploited A antigens to invade cells. Type O and type B individuals had somewhat better outcomes, though smallpox was deadly enough that blood type only provided marginal protection. Still, over centuries of repeated smallpox outbreaks, these small differences accumulated, shaping the distribution of blood types in populations that face the disease regularly. Now, let's talk about more recent infections. When COVID-19 emerged in late 2019 and spread globally, researchers quickly noticed that disease severity wasn't random. Some people developed mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. Others ended up in intensive care or died. Age and underlying health conditions mattered most, but blood type also showed a consistent pattern. Multiple studies across different countries found that type O individuals were less likely to be infected and, when infected, less likely to develop severe disease requiring hospitalization. Type A individuals, by contrast, had higher infection rates and higher rates of severe outcomes, including death. The mechanisms aren't fully understood yet. The research is still ongoing, but several hypotheses have emerged. One is that the virus uses the ACE2 receptor to enter cells, and that receptor's function or availability might be influenced by blood type antigens. Another hypothesis involves blood clotting. COVID-19 causes abnormal clotting in severe cases, with patients developing dangerous blood clots in their lungs, brains, and other organs. Type A blood is already thicker, more prone to clotting, so adding a disease that increases clotting risk on top of that baseline creates a dangerous combination. Type O blood, being thinner and less prone to clots, might be somewhat protected. It's also possible that type O immune systems, with their more aggressive inflammatory responses, clear the virus faster before it can establish severe infection. Norovirus, the stomach bug that causes violent vomiting and diarrhea, also shows blood type preferences. The virus binds to carbohydrate structures on intestinal cells, and those structures vary by blood type. Type B and type AB individuals are more resistant to the most common norovirus strains because the virus can't attach effectively to B antigens. Type A and type O individuals are more vulnerable, getting infected more easily and experiencing more severe symptoms. If you're type B and you've noticed that you rarely get stomach bugs even when everyone around you is sick, this is part of why. Your blood type offers a degree of protection that other types don't have. Influenza. The seasonal flu that mutates constantly and returns every winter doesn't show as clear a blood type pattern, but some research suggests type O individuals may have slightly stronger immune responses to flu viruses, clearing them faster and experiencing shorter illness duration. Type A individuals, with their more cautious, slower ramping immune systems, may take longer to mount full responses, allowing the virus more time to replicate and cause symptoms. Again, these are subtle differences, not dramatic protections, but they're measurable in large population studies. There's also fascinating research on HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. Early in the epidemic, researchers noticed that some people exposed to HIV repeatedly never became infected, and others who did become infected progressed to AIDS much more slowly than average. Blood type turned out to be one factor among many. Type O individuals, particularly those who are also Rh negative, showed somewhat lower infection rates and slower disease progression in some studies. The mechanisms might involve how the virus interacts with immune cells, or how effectively type O immune systems recognize and target infected cells. HIV research is complex, involving dozens of genetic and immunological factors, but blood type is part of the puzzle. What all of this tells us is that your blood type is not neutral. It's a molecular signature that pathogens have learned to recognize, exploit, or avoid, depending on their evolutionary history. The infections your ancestors survived shaped which blood types became common in your population. And even today, in a world with vaccines, antibiotics, and modern medicine, your blood type still influences your vulnerability to diseases you might encounter, from seasonal stomach bugs to global pandemics. It's not destiny. Type A people aren't doomed to get COVID. Type O people still get malaria. But the odds shift, sometimes slightly, sometimes significantly, based on antigens you've carried since birth and never consciously thought about. And these same antigens influence something even more immediate and dangerous than infection: the way your blood moves through your vessels, how it clots, and what that means for your heart and brain. Blood is supposed to flow. That's its job, its entire evolutionary purpose: to carry oxygen from your lungs to every cell in your body and return carbon dioxide for exhaling. Over and over, 3 billion heartbeats in an average lifetime. But blood also needs to clot. When you're injured, when a vessel tears, blood has to stop flowing, has to transform from liquid to solid, forming a plug that seals the wound before you bleed out. This balance between flowing freely and clotting when necessary is one of the most delicate acts your body performs every second, and your blood type plays a significant role in where that balance sits. Whether your blood leans toward flowing too easily or clotting too readily, and what that means for your long-term risk of heart attacks, strokes, and the quiet damage that accumulates in your vessels over decades. If you're type O, your blood is thinner. Not in the casual sense people use when they talk about blood thinners, but in the specific biochemical sense that your blood has lower levels of a protein called von Willebrand factor, or VWF. This protein is essential for clotting. When a blood vessel is damaged, von Willebrand factor acts like molecular glue, helping platelets stick to the injury site and to each other, forming the initial plug that stops bleeding. Type O individuals have about 25 to 35% lower levels of VWF compared to type A, B, or AB individuals. The reason isn't entirely clear, but it's consistent across populations. Type O blood just doesn't hold onto von Willebrand factor as well. It gets cleared from circulation faster, broken down more quickly, leaving less available when clotting needs to happen. This has immediate practical consequences. If you're type O and you get injured, you bleed more. Your blood takes longer to clot. A cut that might stop bleeding in 3 minutes for a type A person might take 5 or 6 minutes for you. During surgery, doctors know to prepare for more blood loss if the patient is type O. During childbirth, type O women lose slightly more blood on average. And if you have a bleeding disorder like hemophilia or von Willebrand disease, being type O makes it worse, compounding the clotting deficiency you already have. For most of human history, when injuries were common and medical intervention was non-existent, this was a real disadvantage. Type O individuals were more likely to bleed to death from wounds that others might survive. But in the modern world, where most people don't die from traumatic injuries, this same characteristic has become protective. Lower von Willebrand factor means your blood is less likely to clot inappropriately inside your vessels when there's no injury, no reason for clotting to happen. Blood clots that form inside arteries and veins are one of the leading causes of death worldwide. A clot in the coronary arteries causes a heart attack. A clot in the arteries feeding your brain causes a stroke. A clot in the deep veins of your legs can break off, travel to your lungs, and cause a pulmonary embolism. Type O individuals have significantly lower rates of all of these. Studies consistently show that type O blood reduces your risk of heart attack by about 20 to 30% and stroke by about 15 to 20% compared to non-O blood types. Type A, B, and AB individuals have the opposite biology. Your blood contains higher levels of von Willebrand factor, more clotting proteins, thicker consistency. Farmers using sharp tools, herders working with animals, dense communities where injuries from accidents or conflicts were common. They needed blood that clotted efficiently. Bleeding out from a hand wound while harvesting grain was a real risk. Over generations, blood types with better clotting survived at higher rates in these populations. But again, the trade-off appears in modern life. Your blood's readiness to clot becomes a liability when you're sedentary, eating processed foods, living with chronic stress, all factors that damage blood vessel walls and create conditions where inappropriate clotting happens. Type A individuals have the highest rates of cardiovascular disease among all blood types. Your blood is the thickest, most prone to forming clots. You also tend to have higher cholesterol levels, not because you necessarily eat more cholesterol, but because type A bodies seem to produce or clear cholesterol differently. The combination of thick blood and higher cholesterol creates a dangerous synergy. Cholesterol deposits in artery walls, narrowing the vessels, and thick blood is more likely to form clots in those narrowed spaces. This is why type A individuals are disproportionately represented in heart attack and stroke statistics. It's not inevitable. Lifestyle matters enormously. Exercise, diet, stress management, all of these can override genetic predisposition. But the baseline risk is higher, written into the clotting chemistry your blood type produces. Type B and AB individuals fall somewhere in the middle, though closer to type A than to type O. You have elevated von Willebrand factor, thicker blood, higher clotting risk. Type AB, despite being rare, has the highest stroke risk of all blood types, possibly because you inherit thick blood from both A and B, getting a double dose of clotting tendency. Studies have found that type AB individuals are 82% more likely to develop cognitive decline and memory problems as they age, and much of that increased risk is thought to come from reduced blood flow to the brain over time. Thicker blood doesn't deliver oxygen as efficiently. Small vessels in the brain, the ones that feed deep structures involved in memory and executive function, are especially vulnerable to reduced flow and microclots that cause tiny areas of damage, individually insignificant but cumulatively devastating. There's also a connection to blood pressure. Type O individuals tend to have lower blood pressure on average compared to other blood types. Thinner blood flows more easily, requires less force from the heart to push through vessels. Type A, B, and A individuals tend to have higher baseline blood pressure, and they're more likely to develop hypertension, chronic high blood pressure, as they age. High blood pressure damages vessel walls over time, creating rough patches where cholesterol can deposit and clots can form. So, if you're non-O, you're dealing with a combination of thick blood, higher cholesterol, and higher blood pressure, all pushing you toward cardiovascular risk. Now here's where it connects to sleep, because clotting chemistry and cardiovascular health directly influence how well you sleep and how restorative that sleep is. When blood flow to your brain is reduced, either from thick blood, narrowed vessels, or microclots, your brain doesn't get enough oxygen during sleep to perform its essential maintenance functions. Deep sleep, particularly the slow wave stages, is when your brain clears metabolic waste through the glymphatic system, a network of channels that flushes out toxins that accumulated during waking hours. This process requires good blood flow, adequate oxygen delivery, healthy vessel function. If your blood is thick and your vessels are compromised, your glymphatic clearance is less efficient. Waste products build up. Over time, this contributes to cognitive decline, poor memory consolidation, and that feeling of waking up unrefreshed even after a full night's sleep. Type A and AB individuals, with their thicker blood and higher cardiovascular risk, are more likely to experience sleep-disordered breathing, including obstructive sleep apnea. The mechanisms are complex, involving inflammation, blood vessel dysfunction, and altered regulation of breathing during sleep. But the result is that you stop breathing repeatedly during the night, your oxygen levels drop, your brain partially wakes to restart breathing, and you never reach or maintain deep sleep. You wake up exhausted, foggy, irritable, not because you didn't spend enough time in bed, but because your blood chemistry and cardiovascular health disrupted the quality of the sleep you got. There are also clotting issues related to hormones, particularly in women. Estrogen increases clotting tendency. This is why pregnancy and birth control pills both increase the risk of dangerous blood clots, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism. If you're a non-O woman taking hormonal contraceptives, your baseline thick blood is made even thicker by estrogen. The risk is still relatively low in absolute terms. Most women never develop clots, but it's measurably higher than for type O women. Pregnancy also increases clotting risk dramatically, and non-O women have higher rates of pregnancy complications related to clotting, including preeclampsia and placental insufficiency, where blood flow to the placenta is compromised. So what can you do if you're type A, B, or AB and you're realizing your blood has been quietly plotting against your vessels for years? First, movement. Exercise is one of the most powerful interventions for reducing clotting risk. When you move, your blood flows faster, your vessels dilate, clotting proteins are cleared more efficiently, and your body produces natural anticoagulants that keep blood from getting too thick. Even moderate activity, walking 30 minutes a day, dramatically reduces cardiovascular risk. Second, hydration. Thick blood is thicker when you're dehydrated. Drinking enough water keeps blood volume up and viscosity down. Third, diet. Omega-3 fatty acids from fish, flax, and walnuts have natural blood-thinning effects. Reducing processed foods and trans fats lowers inflammation and cholesterol. And fourth, stress management, because chronic stress increases clotting factors and makes blood stickier. Your blood type gave you a starting point, a set of clotting tendencies you inherited from ancestors whose survival depended on a different balance than what serves you now. But biology isn't destiny. The choices you make every day, how you move, what you eat, how you manage stress, these reshape your cardiovascular health far more than genetics alone. Thick blood can be thinned, high risk can be lowered, and the vessel damage that accumulates silently can be slowed or even partially reversed. But first, you have to know where you started, and now you do. Next, we'll look at how these clotting patterns, combined with other blood type characteristics, influence the single biggest killer in the modern world: heart disease. Heart disease is the leading cause of death worldwide, killing more people than all cancers combined, more than accidents, infections, and chronic lung diseases. It's a slow killer, silent for decades, accumulating damage in arteries you can't see or feel until one day a vessel clogs completely and your heart muscle starts dying from lack of oxygen. That's a heart attack. Or a clot travels to your brain and cuts off blood flow to tissue that controls movement, speech, memory. That's a stroke. These events feel sudden, catastrophic, out of nowhere. But they're not. They're the culmination of years or decades of processes that started long before symptoms appeared. Processes influenced by diet, exercise, stress, genetics, and yes, your blood type. Because cardiovascular disease doesn't strike randomly, it has preferences, patterns, vulnerabilities written into the molecular structure of your blood. Let's start with the statistics, because they're striking. Type O individuals have the lowest rates of heart disease and stroke among all blood types. Study after study, across different populations and countries, consistently shows that if you're type O, your baseline cardiovascular risk is 20 to 30% lower than if you're type A, B, or AB. That's not a small difference. In a population where 1 in 4 people will die from heart disease, type O blood reduces your odds significantly. The protection comes primarily from 2 factors we've already discussed. Lower von Willebrand factor, which means thinner blood, less prone to clotting, and lower cholesterol levels on average, which means less material depositing in artery walls. Type A individuals are on the opposite end. You have the highest risk of heart disease among all blood types, driven by thick blood, elevated cholesterol, and higher rates of hypertension. Large population studies have found that type A individuals develop coronary artery disease, the narrowing of arteries that feed the heart, at significantly higher rates and often at younger ages than type O. Part of this is the clotting issue, your blood's tendency to form dangerous clots in already narrowed vessels. But there's also an inflammation component, type A immune systems, while more cautious and strategic, produce higher levels of certain inflammatory markers that damage blood vessel walls over time. Chronic, low-grade inflammation is one of the primary drivers of atherosclerosis, the process where cholesterol and other substances build up inside artery walls, creating plaques that narrow vessels and make them stiff and fragile. Type B cardiovascular risk falls between O and A, closer to A than most people would like. You have thick blood, elevated clotting factors, and moderately higher cholesterol. Type B individuals develop heart disease at rates significantly higher than type O, but slightly lower than type A. The exact mechanisms are still being studied, but it likely involves the same combination of clotting tendency, cholesterol metabolism, and inflammatory patterns. Type AB, despite being rare, has cardiovascular risk profiles that rival or exceed type A. You inherit thick blood from both parent types, getting clotting factors from A and B genes simultaneously. The result is blood that's highly prone to inappropriate clotting, and cardiovascular disease rates in type AB populations reflect this. Now let's talk about cholesterol, because it's central to heart disease and it varies significantly by blood type. Cholesterol isn't inherently bad. It's a waxy substance your body uses to build cell membranes, produce hormones, synthesize vitamin D. You need it. But when you have too much cholesterol circulating in your blood, particularly the type called LDL, or low-density lipoprotein, it starts depositing in artery walls. Immune cells try to clean it up, but they get overwhelmed, die, and become part of the growing plaque. Over years, these plaques narrow arteries, reduce blood flow, and create rough surfaces where clots can form. Type O individuals tend to have lower total cholesterol and lower LDL cholesterol compared to other blood types. The reasons aren't fully understood, but it appears that type O metabolism processes and clears cholesterol more efficiently. Type A, B, and AB individuals have higher baseline cholesterol, and it's not entirely diet dependent. Even when controlling for diet, exercise, and body weight, non-O blood types show elevated cholesterol levels. This suggests there's something about A and B antigens, or the genes closely linked to them, that influences how your liver produces and clears cholesterol. It's not that type A people can't lower their cholesterol through diet and lifestyle. They absolutely can, but they're starting from a higher baseline and have to work harder to get to optimal levels. Blood pressure is another piece of the puzzle. Type O individuals have lower blood pressure on average, often 5 to 10 points lower in both systolic and diastolic measurements compared to type A or AB. This might seem small, but even a 5-point difference in blood pressure, sustained over decades, significantly impacts cardiovascular risk. Lower pressure means less force damaging vessel walls, less stimulus for cholesterol deposition, lower workload on the heart. Type A, B, and AB individuals are more likely to develop hypertension, chronic high blood pressure, as they age. And once hypertension develops, it accelerates all the other cardiovascular risks, thicker blood flowing under higher pressure through narrower vessels, a perfect recipe for clots and ruptures. There's also a connection between blood type and how your body responds to stress, which directly impacts cardiovascular health. Remember, type A individuals have elevated baseline cortisol and more sensitive stress responses. Chronic cortisol elevation damages blood vessels, increases blood pressure, promotes fat storage around organs, and raises blood sugar, all of which contribute to heart disease. Type O individuals, with lower baseline cortisol and more resilient stress recovery, are somewhat protected from the cardiovascular damage that chronic stress causes. Type B individuals, with their sharp but brief cortisol spikes, fall somewhere in between. Your stress is intense but doesn't linger, so the cumulative cardiovascular damage is less than type A but more than type O. Now, here's the connection to sleep. Because cardiovascular health and sleep quality are deeply intertwined, each influencing the other in a feedback loop that can either protect you or slowly destroy you. Good sleep lowers blood pressure, reduces inflammation, improves cholesterol metabolism, and stabilizes blood sugar. During deep sleep, your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, giving your cardiovascular system a nightly break from the demands of waking life. This is called nocturnal dipping, and it's essential for long-term heart health. People whose blood pressure doesn't dip adequately during sleep a condition called non-dipping, have dramatically higher rates of heart attack and stroke. Type A and AB individuals, with their fragmented sleep and difficulty reaching deep stages, are more likely to be non-dippers. Your blood pressure stays elevated throughout the night because your nervous system never fully relaxes, your cortisol doesn't drop the way it should, and your cardiovascular system never gets the restorative break it needs. Over years, this chronic nighttime strain accumulates, accelerating the development of hypertension, vessel damage, and heart disease. If you're type A or AB and you wake up with your heart racing, feeling anxious before you're even fully conscious, this is your cardiovascular system telling you it didn't rest overnight. Poor sleep also disrupts cholesterol metabolism. Sleep deprivation, even just a few nights of inadequate rest, increases LDL cholesterol and triglycerides while decreasing HDL cholesterol, the protective type that removes cholesterol from artery walls. If you're type A, B, or AB, already starting with higher baseline cholesterol, poor sleep makes it worse. You're compounding genetic risk with behavioral risk, and the effects multiply rather than simply add together. Sleep is also when your body clears inflammatory molecules from circulation, repairs vessel walls, and processes metabolic waste. Without adequate deep sleep, inflammation stays elevated, vessel damage goes unrepaired, and your cardiovascular system ages faster than it should. Sleep apnea, where you stop breathing repeatedly during the night, is particularly dangerous for cardiovascular health and disproportionately affects non-O blood types. The repeated drops in oxygen trigger acute stress responses, spikes in blood pressure and heart rate, surges of adrenaline and cortisol. Your cardiovascular system is essentially doing sprints all night while you're unconscious. Over time, this leads to sustained hypertension, irregular heartbeats, increased clotting risk, and accelerated atherosclerosis. If you're type A, B, or AB already at higher cardiovascular risk, undiagnosed sleep apnea is extremely dangerous. It's taking your baseline vulnerabilities and amplifying them every single night. So what can you do if you're non-O and realizing your blood type has given you a cardiovascular disadvantage? First, prioritize sleep. Treat it as seriously as diet and exercise because it influences cardiovascular health just as powerfully. Create conditions for deep sleep. Dark room, cool temperature, consistent schedule, minimal alcohol and caffeine. If you snore loudly or wake up gasping, get evaluated for sleep apnea. Second, manage stress aggressively. Meditation, therapy, time in nature, whatever works for you, because chronic stress is especially damaging to type A cardiovascular systems. Third, move daily. Exercise reduces blood pressure, improves cholesterol, thins blood, and promotes deeper sleep. And fourth, eat in ways that support your specific biology. For type A, that often means more plants, less animal fat. For type B, balanced variety. For type AB, finding what your unpredictable digestion tolerates and sticking with it. Your blood type influences where your cardiovascular journey starts, but not where it ends. The statistics are sobering, but they're population-level averages, not individual destinies. A type A person who sleeps well, exercises, manages stress, and eats thoughtfully can have better cardiovascular health than a type O person who does none of those things. Biology creates tendencies, not inevitabilities, and understanding your specific tendencies, the molecular hand you were dealt, that's the first step toward making choices that protect the heart that's been beating for you every second since before you were born. Next, we'll examine another dark pattern written in blood type, the connection to cancer, and why some types seem more vulnerable than others. Cancer is not one disease. It's hundreds of different diseases, each with its own biology, its own causes, its own patterns of who it strikes and when. But beneath that complexity, there are trends, statistical shadows that emerge when you look at millions of cases across populations. And one of those shadows is blood type. Certain cancers show clear preferences, appearing more frequently in some blood types than others, and while the absolute risks are still relatively small, the patterns are real, measurable, and worth understanding. Because cancer, unlike heart disease or stroke, often feels random, a cruel lottery with no logic. But there is logic, molecular logic, written in genes, antigens, immune responses, and environmental exposures. Your blood type is part of that equation, influencing how your cells communicate, how your immune system surveys for abnormalities, and how certain cancers find footholds in tissue that should reject them. Let's start with stomach cancer, because it shows the clearest blood type association. Type A individuals have significantly higher rates of stomach cancer compared to other blood types, sometimes 20 to 25% higher in large population studies. This isn't a small regional anomaly. It shows up consistently across different countries, different diets, different healthcare systems. The connection appears to involve a bacteria we've mentioned before, Helicobacter pylori, the spiral-shaped organism that colonizes the stomach lining and causes chronic inflammation. This bacteria infects over half the world's population, usually without causing symptoms. But in some people, over decades, that chronic inflammation turns precancerous, then cancerous. Type A individuals are more susceptible to H. pylori infection and more likely to develop severe consequences from it. The bacteria binds more easily to A antigens on stomach cells, colonizing more effectively and triggering stronger inflammatory responses. Type A stomachs also produce less acid, creating a more hospitable environment for the bacteria to survive. Over years, the combination of persistent infection and chronic inflammation damages DNA in stomach cells, causing mutations that can eventually lead to cancer. Type O individuals, with their high stomach acid and different antigen patterns, are more resistant to H. pylori colonization and have lower rates of stomach cancer overall. Type B and AB fall somewhere in between, with moderately elevated risk compared to type O but lower than type A. Pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest cancers with extremely low survival rates, also shows blood type patterns. Non-O blood types, meaning A, B, and AB, have higher rates of pancreatic cancer compared to type O. The increase is significant, around 20 to 40% depending on the study and population. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but several theories exist. One involves chronic inflammation. Non-O individuals tend to have higher baseline levels of inflammatory markers, and chronic inflammation is a known driver of pancreatic cancer. Another theory involves blood flow and clotting. The pancreas is a highly vascular organ, filled with tiny blood vessels, and thicker blood might create conditions where cells don't get adequate oxygen, leading to DNA damage and increased cancer risk. There's also intriguing research suggesting that A and B antigens might directly influence cancer cell behavior. Cancer cells often express abnormal versions of blood type antigens on their surfaces, and these abnormal antigens can help cancer cells evade immune detection, stick to other tissues during metastasis, and resist treatment. If you already have A or B antigens throughout your body, your immune system might be less able to recognize the abnormal versions that cancer cells produce, giving those cells a survival advantage. Type O individuals lacking A and B antigens might have immune systems that more easily spot these abnormalities and destroy precancerous cells before they grow into tumors. Ovarian cancer shows a similar pattern, with non-O blood types having moderately higher risk. Breast cancer research is more mixed, with some studies showing slight elevations in type A and others showing no significant pattern. Colorectal cancer. Cancer of the colon and rectum doesn't show strong blood type associations in most studies, though there's some evidence that type A individuals might have slightly higher risk, possibly related to gut microbiome differences and how A-type bacteria populations influence inflammation in the intestinal lining. Lung cancer rates don't seem to vary significantly by blood type, which makes sense since lung cancer is so overwhelmingly driven by smoking that genetic factors like blood type are drowned out by environmental exposure. Leukemia and lymphoma. Type A individuals have slightly higher rates of certain leukemias, possibly because A-type immune systems have different baseline activity levels that influence how blood cells develop and regulate themselves. But the associations are weak, and most blood cancers appear to be driven more by random mutations, toxic exposures, and viral infections than by blood type. Now here's the critical context. Even when blood type associations exist, the absolute risk increases are modest. If type O individuals have a 5% lifetime risk of developing pancreatic cancer, type A individuals might have a 6 or 7% risk. That's a real increase, statistically significant, but it's not the difference between safety and doom. Most type A people never develop stomach or pancreatic cancer. Most type O people aren't protected from all cancers. Blood type is one factor among dozens, including genetics unrelated to blood type, environmental exposures, infections, diet, exercise, stress, sleep, and pure randomness. The accumulated mutations that happen in cells over decades of living. But understanding your blood type's cancer associations can inform screening decisions. If you're type A, knowing you have elevated stomach cancer risk might make you more diligent about getting tested for H. pylori and treating it if found. If you're type A, B, or AB, knowing you have higher pancreatic cancer risk might make you more attentive to symptoms like unexplained weight loss, jaundice, or persistent abdominal pain, prompting earlier medical evaluation. Cancer caught early is far more treatable than cancer caught late, and even small increases in awareness can translate to earlier detection and better outcomes. There's also a sleep connection, because poor sleep increases cancer risk across all types. Sleep is when your immune system surveys your body for abnormal cells, destroying precancerous cells before they can grow. Sleep is when DNA repair mechanisms work most actively, fixing the mutations that accumulate during waking hours from normal metabolism, oxidative stress, and environmental exposures. Sleep is when inflammation drops, giving tissues a break from the chronic damage that promotes cancer development. If you're not sleeping well, if you're not reaching deep sleep stages consistently, these protective processes are compromised. Your immune system misses abnormal cells. DNA damage goes unrepaired. Inflammation stays elevated. Over years, this increases cancer risk measurably. Type A and AB individuals, already at higher baseline risk for certain cancers and also more prone to fragmented sleep, face a compounding problem. Your genetic predisposition combined with poor sleep quality creates conditions where cancer is more likely to develop and less likely to be caught early by immune surveillance. But it does mean that sleep quality is especially important for you. Every night of deep, restorative sleep is a night when your immune system is patrolling effectively, your DNA repair is functioning optimally, and your inflammation is dropping to protective levels. There's also research suggesting that chronic stress, which disrupts sleep and elevates cortisol, directly promotes cancer growth. Stress hormones can suppress immune function, increase inflammation, and even stimulate cancer cells to grow and metastasize more aggressively. Type A individuals, with their elevated baseline cortisol and more reactive stress responses, may be more vulnerable to stress-related cancer promotion. Managing stress, improving sleep, and keeping cortisol levels from staying chronically elevated, these aren't just quality of life interventions. They're cancer prevention strategies, particularly for blood types with higher baseline risk. Diet also interacts with blood type in ways that might influence cancer risk. Type A individuals with high rates of stomach cancer often do better on plant-based diets that reduce stomach inflammation and create less hospitable environments for H. pylori. Type O individuals with lower cancer risk overall but higher rates of ulcers might benefit from diets that support stomach lining health without causing excessive acid production. These aren't rigid rules. Human nutrition is far too complex for that, but they're patterns worth considering when making dietary choices. So what does blood type teach us about cancer? It teaches us that cancer isn't entirely random, that there are molecular patterns, genetic vulnerabilities, immune variations that shift the odds. It teaches us that type O individuals have modest protection against some common cancers, not because they do anything special, but because their blood chemistry creates slightly less favorable conditions for certain cancer types to develop. And it teaches us that type A, B, and AB individuals need to be especially attentive to screening, symptoms, and the lifestyle factors, sleep, stress, diet, exercise, that influence whether genetic predispositions become actual disease. Your blood type gave you a starting point, a baseline risk profile. But what you do with that information, how you sleep, how you eat, how you manage your stress and stay engaged with preventive care, that determines whether those genetic tendencies ever matter. And speaking of the brain, there's one more deeply concerning connection we need to explore between blood type, blood flow, and what happens to memory and cognition as we age. Your brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in your body, using about 20% of your total oxygen supply despite representing only 2% of your body weight. It runs on blood flow, entirely dependent on a constant supply of oxygen and glucose delivered through a network of vessels so intricate that if you laid them end to end, they'd stretch for about 400 miles. When blood flow to the brain is compromised, even slightly, even chronically over years rather than acutely in a stroke, the consequences accumulate. Memory fades. Processing speed slows. The ability to focus, plan, and regulate emotions weakens. This is cognitive decline, and it's not an inevitable part of aging. It's a result of decades of inadequate blood flow, micro-damage to vessels, silent strokes too small to notice but cumulatively devastating. And your blood type influences how likely this is to happen to you, because the same clotting tendencies and vessel health patterns that affect your heart also affect your brain. Let's start with the research that alarmed neurologists when it was published. A large study following thousands of people over decades found that individuals with type AB blood had an 82% higher risk of developing cognitive impairment and memory problems as they aged compared to type O individuals. 82%. That's not a subtle trend. That's a dramatic elevation in risk, one of the strongest blood type associations ever found for any health condition. The study controlled for other factors: age, education, cardiovascular health, diabetes, smoking, and the association remained. Something about type AB blood specifically predisposes people to cognitive decline, and the mechanism appears to be blood flow. Type AB blood, remember, is the thickest of all blood types, carrying high levels of von Willebrand factor and clotting proteins inherited from both A and B genes. This thickness means blood doesn't flow as easily through the smallest vessels, the capillaries that feed deep brain structures involved in memory, attention, and executive function. Over years, reduced flow means reduced oxygen delivery. Brain cells that don't get enough oxygen function poorly, and if the deficit is chronic, they eventually die. The damage accumulates silently. You don't feel it happening. There's no pain, no obvious symptoms, just a gradual erosion of cognitive capacity that becomes noticeable only when enough damage has accumulated that compensatory mechanisms can't hide it anymore. Type AB individuals also have higher rates of silent strokes, small areas of brain tissue that die from blocked blood flow but don't cause dramatic symptoms like paralysis or speech loss. These silent strokes show up on brain imaging as white spots, areas of dead tissue scattered through the brain like tiny scars. Individually, each one might be too small to notice, but dozens or hundreds of them, accumulated over decades, create a cognitive burden. Your brain is working with less functional tissue, fewer intact neural networks, reduced processing capacity. This is why type AB individuals often report feeling like their memory isn't as sharp as it used to be, like they're struggling to find words or focus on complex tasks. It's not imagination. It's the cumulative effect of vascular damage written in thick blood. Type A and B individuals have moderately elevated cognitive decline risk compared to type O, not as dramatic as AB, but still measurable. The mechanisms are similar: thicker blood, higher clotting tendency, reduced flow through small vessels, cumulative microdamage over time. Type A individuals, with their higher rates of cardiovascular disease and hypertension, are especially vulnerable because high blood pressure damages vessel walls, making them stiff and narrow, further restricting flow. Type B individuals, with their flexible but sometimes excessive immune responses, may experience more inflammation in brain vessels, another pathway to cognitive damage. Type O individuals have the lowest rates of cognitive decline and dementia across all blood types. Your thinner blood, lower clotting tendency, and better vessel health mean your brain gets more consistent oxygen delivery over your lifetime. The small vessels deep in your brain, the ones that feed the hippocampus where memories form and the prefrontal cortex where executive decisions happen, these vessels stay healthier, longer. You're not immune to cognitive decline, no one is, but your baseline risk is significantly lower, and if decline does happen, it tends to start later and progress more slowly. Now, let's talk about inflammation, because it's another critical piece of the cognitive puzzle. Chronic inflammation in the brain, called neuroinflammation, damages neurons, disrupts communication between brain regions, and promotes the accumulation of proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. Type A and AB individuals, with their higher baseline inflammatory markers, are more prone to neuroinflammation. Your immune systems produce more inflammatory signaling molecules, and those molecules cross into the brain, activating immune cells there called microglia. Normally, microglia are helpful, clearing debris and fighting infections, but when they're chronically activated by inflammatory signals, they become destructive, releasing chemicals that damage the very neurons they're supposed to protect. Sleep is where this all connects most powerfully, because sleep is when your brain clears the metabolic waste and inflammatory molecules that accumulate during waking hours. There's a system called the glymphatic system, discovered only in the last 15 years, that functions like a waste disposal network for the brain. During deep sleep, the spaces between brain cells expand, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow through and flush out toxins, including amyloid beta and tau proteins, the substances that build up in Alzheimer's disease. This clearance is most effective during slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage when brain activity is synchronized and rhythmic. If you're not getting enough deep sleep, if your sleep is fragmented or shallow, your glymphatic clearance is compromised. Waste products that should be flushed out overnight remain in your brain, accumulating day after day, month after month, year after year, over decades. This accumulation contributes directly to cognitive decline and increases Alzheimer's risk. Type A and AB individuals, already prone to fragmented sleep and difficulty reaching deep stages, are facing a double burden. Your blood type makes you more vulnerable to cognitive decline through vascular mechanisms, and your poor sleep quality compounds that vulnerability by preventing adequate waste clearance. There's also research showing that sleep deprivation increases amyloid beta production in the brain. Even a single night of poor sleep causes measurable increases in this protein, and chronic sleep deprivation leads to sustained elevations. If you're type AB, already at high risk for cognitive decline, and you're consistently not sleeping well, you're essentially accelerating the very processes you should be fighting against. Your thick blood is reducing oxygen delivery, your elevated inflammation is damaging neurons, and your poor sleep is preventing cleanup and actively producing more of the toxic proteins associated with dementia. Blood pressure control during sleep is also critical for brain health. We talked earlier about nocturnal dipping, the normal drop in blood pressure that happens during sleep. People whose blood pressure doesn't dip adequately, staying elevated throughout the night, have higher rates of cognitive decline and dementia. Type A and AB individuals, with their higher baseline blood pressure and more fragmented sleep, are more likely to be non-dippers. Your brain is experiencing sustained pressure on its vessels every night, never getting the recovery period it needs, and over years, that sustained pressure damages the delicate capillaries that feed deep brain structures. There's also a connection between blood type and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein that supports neuron growth, survival, and the formation of new connections. Exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, increases BDNF production dramatically. Sleep also regulates BDNF, with deep sleep promoting its release. Type O individuals tend to have higher baseline BDNF levels, possibly related to their overall better vascular health and lower inflammation. Type A and AB individuals have lower BDNF levels on average, making it harder for your brains to repair damage, grow new connections, and maintain cognitive flexibility. This makes exercise and sleep even more critical for you. You need to actively support BDNF production because your baseline is lower. Diet also plays a role in cognitive health through blood type-specific mechanisms. Type A individuals often do better cognitively on diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and plant compounds that reduce inflammation. The Mediterranean diet, heavy on fish, olive oil, vegetables, and whole grains, has been shown to reduce cognitive decline risk, and it may be especially protective for Type A individuals whose baseline inflammation is higher. Type O individuals benefit from diets that support stable blood sugar, because even though your vascular health is better, blood sugar spikes and crashes still damage brain vessels over time. Stress management is another critical factor. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, and sustained high cortisol damages the hippocampus, the brain region most important for forming new memories. Type A individuals with your elevated baseline cortisol and sensitive stress responses are particularly vulnerable to stress-induced cognitive damage. Learning to manage stress effectively through meditation, therapy, time in nature, exercise, whatever works for you, isn't just about feeling better in the moment. It's about protecting your brain's structure and function over decades. So what does this mean practically? If you're Type AB, and to a lesser extent Type A or B, you need to treat cognitive health as a priority decades before you'd expect memory problems to appear. That means prioritizing sleep above almost everything else, because sleep is when your brain clears waste and repairs damage. It means exercising regularly to improve blood flow, reduce inflammation, and boost BDNF. It means managing blood pressure and cholesterol aggressively, not waiting until numbers are dangerously high. It means eating in ways that reduce inflammation and support vascular health. And it means staying cognitively engaged, learning new things, maintaining social connections, challenging your brain to form new neural pathways that can compensate if others are damaged. Your blood type gave you a cognitive starting point, a set of vascular and inflammatory tendencies that influence how well your brain will age. But that starting point is not your ending point. The brain has remarkable plasticity, remarkable capacity to adapt and compensate if you give it the conditions it needs. Thick blood can be managed, inflammation can be reduced, sleep can be improved, and the cognitive decline that seems inevitable can be delayed, minimized, or even prevented entirely. But first, you have to understand the risk, and now you do. Next, we'll tackle one of the most popular and controversial ideas about blood type, the theory that you should eat according to your type, and what science actually says about it. There's a cultural phenomenon around blood type that's bigger in some parts of the world than others, a belief that your blood type doesn't just influence your biology, but defines your personality, your temperament, your compatibility with others, even your ideal career path. In Japan, this is called Ketsueki Gata, and it's taken seriously enough that people routinely ask about blood type on dates, in job interviews, during casual conversations. Type A individuals are seen as earnest, reserved, perfectionistic. Type B people are creative, individualistic, sometimes selfish. Type O individuals are confident, sociable, natural leaders, and Type AB people are rational, mysterious, unpredictable. There are books, dating services, marketing campaigns, all built around these personality profiles. But here's the question science asks. Is any of it real, or is it astrology with a medical veneer? The blood type personality theory emerged in Japan in the early 20th century, popularized in the 1920s by a scholar named Takeji Furukawa, who proposed that blood type determined temperament and could be used for social engineering, matching people to appropriate roles in society. The idea fell out of favor after World War II because of its associations with eugenics and racial pseudoscience, but it resurged in the 1970s when a journalist named Masahiko Nomi wrote a best-selling book claiming blood type influenced everything from romantic compatibility to work performance. Today, millions of people in Japan, Korea, and other parts of Asia believe in blood type personality, referencing it casually the way Westerners might reference astrological signs. So what does the actual scientific research show? The short answer is almost nothing. Dozens of studies have attempted to find correlations between blood type and personality traits, and the overwhelming majority find no significant associations. When researchers give personality assessments to large groups of people and compare results by blood type, the differences are either non-existent or so small they could easily be due to chance. Type A people are not measurably more anxious or perfectionist than Type O. Type B people are not more creative or selfish. Type AB people are not more rational or unpredictable. The personality profiles don't hold up under rigorous testing. But here's where it gets psychologically interesting. People who believe in blood type personality often feel that the descriptions fit them perfectly. They read that Type A individuals are detail-oriented and cautious, and they think, yes, that's exactly me. Type B people read that they're independent and unconventional, and it resonates. This is called the Barnum effect, named after the circus showman P. T. Barnum. And it's the same psychological phenomenon that makes horoscopes feel accurate. The descriptions are vague enough, positive enough, and general enough that almost anyone can see themselves in them. When a description says you're thoughtful but sometimes overthink things, most people will agree, because most people have experienced both thoughtfulness and overthinking at various points in their lives. There's also confirmation bias at work. Once you believe you're a typical Type A personality, you notice and remember instances that confirm it while ignoring or forgetting instances that contradict it. You remember the time you triple-checked a document before sending it, confirming your perfectionism, but you forget the times you sent things without reviewing them. Your brain is actively constructing a narrative that supports the belief, filtering your memories and perceptions to create coherence. This is how all personality typing systems, from blood type to astrology to Myers-Briggs, maintain their psychological power despite lacking scientific validity. They feel true because our brains make them feel true. Now, does that mean blood type has absolutely no influence on personality? That's a more nuanced question. Blood type doesn't determine personality in the way the popular theories claim. You're not destined to be anxious because you're Type A or creative because you're Type B. But blood type does influence physiology, stress hormones, immune responses, digestion, sleep quality, and those physiological differences can subtly shape behavioral tendencies over a lifetime. If you're Type A with elevated baseline cortisol, you might be slightly more prone to anxiety, not because the A antigen makes you anxious, but because chronic, low-level stress affects how you experience and respond to the world. If you're Type O with better stress recovery, you might be slightly more resilient, more likely to bounce back from setbacks, not because of personality, but because of cortisol dynamic. These are not personality traits in the way psychologists define them. They're physiological tendencies that create a subtle backdrop to your emotional life. Two people with identical personalities, one Type A and one Type O, might experience the same stressful event differently because their bodies are producing different levels of stress hormones. Over a lifetime, those small physiological differences might accumulate into slight behavioral patterns. But it's indirect, mediated through biology, not a direct link from blood antigen to character. and it's overshadowed by far more powerful influences. Your upbringing, your experiences, your culture, your choices, your relationships. Blood type might nudge. It doesn't determine. There is some interesting research suggesting blood type might correlate with certain cognitive styles or preferences, though the findings are preliminary and inconsistent. One study found that type A individuals scored slightly higher on measures of harm, avoidance, and lower on novelty seeking compared to type O, which aligns with what we know about stress chemistry. Type O individuals, in some studies, score higher on extroversion and lower on neuroticism. Type B individuals sometimes show up as more adaptable and open to new experiences, but these correlations, when they exist at all, are weak. They explain maybe 1 or 2% of the variance in personality, meaning 98% of what makes you who you are has nothing to do with your blood type. The social consequences of blood type personality belief can be real and harmful. In Japan, people have reported discrimination based on blood type, being rejected for jobs, relationships, or social opportunities because they're the wrong type. Type B individuals, stereotyped as selfish and unreliable, sometimes face prejudice. Type AB individuals, seen as weird or difficult, might be excluded. This is no different from any other form of stereotyping, judging individuals based on group membership rather than their actual qualities. And it's especially insidious because it masquerades as science, as objective fact, when it's really just modern superstition. Now, let's talk about what blood type actually does affect, which is physical traits, not personality. Your blood type influences your digestion, your immune function, your susceptibility to certain diseases, your stress hormone patterns, your sleep quality, your microbiome, your clotting tendency. These are real, measurable, scientifically validated differences. A type A person who understands their elevated cortisol and adjusts their lifestyle accordingly, prioritizing stress management and sleep, will feel and function differently than a type A person who ignores these tendencies. A type O person who recognizes their high stomach acid and adjusts their diet to include adequate protein will feel better than a type O person eating mostly carbohydrates. So the wisdom isn't in believing your blood type defines your personality. It's in understanding the physiological patterns associated with your blood type and working with them rather than against them. If you're type A, knowing you have a sensitive stress response doesn't mean you're destined to be anxious. It means you benefit more than other types from practices that calm your nervous system, meditation, deep breathing, regular sleep schedules, limiting caffeine. If you're type O, knowing you have high stomach acid and protein-optimized digestion doesn't mean you must eat meat. It means you'll probably feel better if you include adequate protein from whatever sources you choose and don't go long periods without eating. The danger of personality typing by blood type is that it encourages people to see themselves as fixed, limited by biology, when the truth is far more empowering. You are not your blood type. You're not the sum of your antigens and antibodies. You're the product of countless influences, most of which you can shape and change. Your blood type gave you a starting point, a set of physiological tendencies, but you get to decide what to do with those tendencies. You get to build practices, habits, and coping strategies that work with your biology rather than fighting it. And here's what's genuinely interesting. When people engage with blood type information in this more nuanced, physiological way, understanding it as biology rather than destiny, they often do experience benefit. Not because their blood type determined their personality, but because they're paying attention to their bodies, noticing patterns, making adjustments that support their specific needs. A type A person who learns about elevated cortisol and starts prioritizing sleep isn't being controlled by their blood type. They're using information about their blood type to make empowered choices. That's the difference between superstition and self-knowledge. So the next time someone asks your blood type and starts making assumptions about your personality, you can smile and know that they're engaging in a modern form of fortune-telling, psychologically compelling but scientifically empty. And you can also know that your blood type does matter, just not in the ways they think. It matters for your heart, your immune system, your gut, your sleep, your long-term health risks, all the invisible biology that shapes your life in ways personality quizzes never capture. The real wisdom is knowing which blood type claims to take seriously and which to dismiss as entertaining but meaningless noise. And next, we'll turn to perhaps the most popular blood type claim of all, the idea that you should eat according to your type, and what happens when that theory meets actual nutritional science. In 1996, a naturopathic physician named Peter D'Adamo published a book called Eat Right for Your Type, and it became a massive international bestseller, translated into dozens of languages, selling millions of copies, spawning an entire industry of blood type diet programs, supplements, meal plans, and cookbooks. The central claim was simple and compelling. Your blood type determines which foods are beneficial for you and which are harmful. And eating according to your type will improve your health, help you lose weight, boost your energy, and prevent disease. Type O individuals, D'Adamo argued, should eat like hunters, high protein, lots of meat, minimal grains. Type A individuals should eat like farmers, mostly plant-based, grains and vegetables, limited animal products. Type B individuals should eat like nomads, a varied diet including dairy, which other types should avoid. And Type AB individuals should eat a combination approach, borrowing from both A and B recommendations. The theory was based on the evolutionary origins of blood types that we've discussed. The idea that Type O emerged first in hunter-gatherer populations, Type A appeared with agriculture, and Type B developed in nomadic herding cultures. D'Adamo proposed that each blood type retained digestive and metabolic adaptations suited to those ancestral diets, and that modern health problems arise when people eat foods incompatible with their blood type. He claimed that certain foods contain proteins called lectins that react badly with specific blood type antigens, causing inflammation, digestive problems, and weight gain. The solution, he said, was to avoid those incompatible foods and eat primarily foods that match your blood type's evolutionary profile. It's an elegant theory, internally consistent, appealing to intuition about how evolution works, and for many people who tried the diet, it seemed to work. They lost weight, felt more energized, experienced less bloating and digestive discomfort, saw improvements in cholesterol and blood pressure. Testimonials flooded in. The diet had passionate adherents who swore it changed their lives. But here's what scientists wanted to know. Was it the blood type specific recommendations that created these benefits, or was it something else? The only way to find out was through rigorous research, controlled studies that could separate the blood type component from other factors. And when those studies were finally conducted, the results were clear and disappointing for D'Adamo's theory. In 2014, researchers published a systematic review examining all available evidence for the blood type diet. They found no credible scientific support. Studies that tracked people eating according to their blood type recommendations found health improvements, but those improvements occurred regardless of whether participants actually followed their assigned blood type diet. Type A people who ate high-protein diets improved just as much as type A people who ate plant-based. Type O people on plant-based diets saw the same benefits as type O people eating meat. The blood type matching didn't matter. What mattered was that people were eating more whole foods, fewer processed foods, paying attention to portions, and being mindful of what they consumed. A large Canadian study published in 2013 looked at over 1,500 participants, measuring detailed dietary intake and health markers. They found that adherence to certain blood type diets did produce health benefits, but those benefits were completely independent of the person's actual blood type. Anyone following the type A diet, which is mostly plant-based, saw improvements in body weight and metabolic markers, regardless of whether they were actually type A. Anyone following the type O diet, which restricts processed carbohydrates, showed improvements whether they were type O or not. The mechanism was simply that the diets, in general, were improvements over standard Western eating patterns. The blood type specificity was irrelevant. The lectin theory, central to Didamo's claims, also doesn't hold up. Lectins are real proteins found in many foods, particularly legumes, grains, and nightshade vegetables. Some lectins can cause digestive upset if consumed in large amounts raw, which is why you're supposed to cook beans thoroughly. But the idea that specific lectins selectively harm people based on their blood type isn't supported by biochemical evidence. The interactions Didamo described, where dietary lectins bind to blood type antigens in the gut and cause inflammation, don't happen in any meaningful way in actual human digestion. Your stomach acid, digestive enzymes, and gut barrier prevent dietary lectins from interacting with blood type antigens in the way the theory proposes. So if the blood type diet doesn't work through the mechanisms Didamo claimed, why do so many people report feeling better on it? Several reasons. First, any diet that eliminates processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates while emphasizing whole foods, vegetables, and adequate protein will make most people feel better. That's not blood type magic. That's basic nutrition. Second, restrictive diets often lead to weight loss simply by reducing overall food intake and increasing dietary awareness. When you're constantly checking whether a food is allowed for your blood type, you're paying attention, making conscious choices, not eating mindlessly. That awareness alone improves outcomes. Third, there's a powerful placebo effect when you believe you're eating in a way that's uniquely suited to your biology. If you're type A and you commit to a plant-based diet believing it's optimal for your blood type, you're more likely to stick with it. Prepare meals carefully, notice positive changes, and attribute those changes to the diet. Your expectations shape your experience. This isn't fake. The placebo effect produces real physiological changes: reduced stress, improved digestion, better sleep, because belief and expectation influence nervous system function, hormone production, and even immune responses. Fourth, elimination diets often help people identify food intolerances they didn't know they had. If you're type A following Didamo's diet and you eliminate dairy, and you suddenly feel less bloated and more energetic, it's probably because you're lactose intolerant or sensitive to dairy proteins, not because dairy is incompatible with A antigens. The blood type framework gave you a reason to try eliminating dairy, and you discovered something genuinely helpful, but the blood type reasoning was incidental. Any elimination diet would have revealed the same intolerance. Now here's the nuance. Even though the blood type diet doesn't work through the mechanisms Didamo proposed, there are real, scientifically supported connections between blood type and optimal nutrition. We've discussed how type O individuals have higher stomach acid and protein-optimized digestion, how type A individuals have lower stomach acid and carbohydrate fermenting gut bacteria, how type B individuals handle dairy better than other types. These are real physiological differences, and they do suggest that different blood types might thrive on somewhat different dietary approaches. But the patterns are far more flexible and individual than D'Adamo's rigid prescriptions suggest. A type O person might feel best on a diet with substantial protein, but that protein doesn't have to come from meat. Beans, lentils, tofu, eggs, fish, all can satisfy the digestive and metabolic needs of type O biology. And some type O people, because of individual variation that has nothing to do with blood type, might feel perfectly fine on mostly plant-based diets. A type A person might feel better emphasizing plant foods, but that doesn't mean animal products are harmful. Many type A individuals include moderate amounts of fish, poultry, or dairy without problems. The key is paying attention to how your body responds, not following rigid rules based on evolutionary speculation. Type B's advantage with dairy is real, backed by research on lactase persistence and gut bacteria, but it doesn't mean type B people must eat dairy or that other types must avoid it. It just means if you're type B and you enjoy dairy, you're more likely to tolerate it well. If you're type A or O and dairy makes you feel bloated or sluggish, that's useful information. But it's not because of antigen incompatibility. It's because you lack sufficient lactase enzyme or your gut bacteria don't handle it well. The bigger insight is that personalized nutrition is real and important, but blood type is a very crude tool for personalization. Better markers include your gut microbiome composition, which can now be tested directly, your metabolic responses to different foods, measurable through continuous glucose monitors, your inflammatory markers, your genetic variants related to nutrient metabolism, and most importantly, your subjective experience of how different foods make you feel, your energy, your digestion, your sleep, your mood. These individual factors matter far more than blood type alone. Sleep quality is actually one of the best indicators of whether your diet is working for you, regardless of blood type. If you're eating in a way that suits your body, you should sleep well, fall asleep relatively easily, stay asleep through the night, wake feeling rested. If you're eating foods that cause inflammation, blood sugar instability, or digestive distress, your sleep will suffer. Type A individuals who eat heavy animal fat and not enough fiber often report worse sleep, probably because of increased gut inflammation and disrupted microbiome. Type O individuals who eat mostly refined carbohydrates and insufficient protein often report energy crashes and difficulty sleeping, probably because of blood sugar instability and inadequate amino acids for neurotransmitter production. So the wisdom isn't in following D'Adamo's blood type diet rules religiously. It's in understanding the general physiological tendencies associated with your blood type and using that as one input among many when making dietary choices. Experiment. Pay attention. Notice what makes you feel energized versus sluggish, what improves your sleep versus disrupts it, what satisfies you versus leaves you hungry an hour later. Your body will tell you what works, and that information is far more reliable than any book claiming to know your optimal diet based solely on antigens. The blood type diet got one thing profoundly right. Nutrition is not one size fits all. People do have different needs, different optimal approaches, but it got the mechanism wrong and oversimplified the complexity of human metabolism. Your blood type is one factor among dozens that influence how your body processes food. And recognizing that complexity, refusing to reduce yourself to a single genetic marker, that's where real nutritional wisdom begins. Now let's bring everything together. all these threads of blood type, biology, and ask the final question: what does it actually mean to live well with the blood type you were given? So here we are, at the end of this long journey through your bloodstream, and maybe you're wondering what any of this actually means for your life. You've learned that your blood type influences your immune system, your digestion, your stress responses, your cardiovascular health, your cancer risk, your cognitive aging, your microbiome, your clotting tendency. You've learned that type O blood offers protection against some threats but vulnerability to others. That type A blood carries cardiovascular and cancer risks, but also specific digestive strengths. That type B blood brings flexibility and dairy tolerance alongside autoimmune tendencies. And that type AB blood is rare, complex, contradictory, carrying the highest risks for stroke and cognitive decline, but also unique immunological advantages. But knowledge without application is just trivia. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, understand that your blood type is not your destiny. It's a starting point, a set of tendencies, a baseline risk profile. But tendencies are not certainties. A type A person who lives well, who sleeps deeply, exercises regularly, manages stress effectively, eats thoughtfully, can be healthier and live longer than a type O person who does none of those things. Biology creates possibilities, not inevitabilities. The statistics we've discussed are population averages, showing what happens when you track thousands or millions of people and look for patterns. But you're not a population, you're an individual, and your choices matter more than your antigens. Second, use blood type information to inform your health priorities. If you're type O, you know you have lower cardiovascular risk but higher bleeding tendency, higher stomach acid, and vulnerability to ulcers and cholera. This means you can probably relax a bit about heart disease risk, though you shouldn't ignore it entirely, but you should be attentive to digestive health, manage stress to protect your stomach lining, and ensure you're eating enough protein to support your high-acid digestion. If you bleed easily, make sure doctors know your blood type before surgeries, and be cautious with medications that thin blood further. If you're type A, you know you have elevated cardiovascular risk, higher cancer risk, particularly for stomach and pancreas, thicker blood, elevated baseline cortisol, and lower stomach acid. This means cardiovascular health should be a lifelong priority. Get your cholesterol and blood pressure checked regularly. If you have risk factors, address them early, not when numbers become alarming. Consider screening for H. pylori, the stomach bacteria that increases cancer risk, and treat it if found. Prioritize sleep aggressively because your fragmented sleep compounds your cardiovascular and cognitive risks. Learn stress management techniques that work for you because your elevated cortisol is damaging your vessels and your brain over time. And pay attention to your digestion, eating in ways that don't overtax your lower stomach acid, which might mean emphasizing plant foods and limiting heavy animal fats. If you're type B, you have moderate cardiovascular risk, good dairy tolerance, flexible immune responses that sometimes overreact, and stress chemistry that spikes hard but recovers quickly. This means you benefit from dietary variety, and dairy is less likely to cause problems for you than for other types. But watch for autoimmune symptoms, unexplained fatigue, joint pain, skin issues, because your immune system can turn against you. Your stress resilience is good, but don't mistake quick recovery for invulnerability. Those acute stress spikes are still doing damage in the moment, so find ways to reduce the frequency and intensity of stressful episodes, not just recover from them faster. If you're type AB, you face the most complex health profile and the highest risks for several serious conditions. Your cardiovascular risk is elevated, Your stroke risk is the highest of all types, your cognitive decline risk is dramatically higher, and your blood is the thickest. This isn't meant to frighten you, it's meant to mobilize you. You need to be more diligent than other blood types about the factors that protect against these risks. Sleep is not optional for you, it's essential. Your thick blood and elevated inflammation mean your brain depends on high-quality sleep for waste clearance and vascular health. Exercise is not negotiable. You need to move daily to keep blood flowing, vessels flexible, and inflammation down. Blood pressure and cholesterol management should start early, not when you're already symptomatic. And stress management is critical because your hybrid stress chemistry, combining type A vigilance with type B reactivity, is exhausting your system. Third, recognize that blood type is just one piece of a much larger health puzzle. Your genetics beyond blood type, your environment, your lifestyle, your access to healthcare, your stress levels, your relationships, your sleep quality, your diet, your exercise habits, these all matter enormously. Many of them matter more than blood type. A type AB person with excellent sleep, regular exercise, strong social connections, and good stress management will almost certainly outlive a type O person with terrible sleep, sedentary lifestyle, chronic stress, and poor diet. Don't let blood type information become an excuse or a source of fatalism. Use it as motivation to address the specific vulnerabilities you're more prone to, but remember that addressing those vulnerabilities is within your control. Fourth, stay engaged with preventive care and screening appropriate for your blood type risks. If you're type A, B, or AB with elevated cardiovascular risk, don't skip routine checkups. Get your cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar checked regularly. If numbers start creeping up, address them early through lifestyle changes or medication if needed. If you're type A with elevated stomach cancer risk, consider H. pylori testing, especially if you have digestive symptoms. If you're type AB with high cognitive decline risk, prioritize brain health early, in your 30s and 40s, not waiting until you notice memory problems in your 60s or 70s. Preventive care works best when it's truly preventive, catching problems before they become serious. Fifth, understand that knowing your blood type gives you power in medical emergencies. Always know your blood type and carry documentation, whether a card in your wallet or a medical ID bracelet. In a severe accident or medical crisis where you need transfusion, knowing your type can save time and potentially save your life. If you're Rh negative, this is especially important, because getting Rh positive blood can sensitize you and cause problems in future transfusions or pregnancies. Medical personnel will test your blood before transfusing anyway, but having the information readily available helps. Sixth, use blood type knowledge to optimize sleep, because sleep is where so many of these biological patterns converge. Type A and AB individuals, knowing you have fragmented sleep tendencies and elevated cortisol, should create stronger sleep hygiene practices than other types. Make your bedroom a sanctuary, dark, cool, quiet, reserved for sleep and intimacy only. Establish a consistent sleep schedule, same bedtime and wake time every day, even weekends. Limit caffeine strictly, perhaps none after noon, because your sensitive nervous system needs more time to clear stimulants. Practice wind-down routines that actively calm your nervous system. Reading, gentle stretching, meditation, warm baths. Whatever signals to your body that threat time is over and rest time is beginning. Type O and B individuals with more resilient sleep chemistry still benefit from good sleep practices, but you might get away with more flexibility. You can probably handle occasional late nights or schedule variations without cascading consequences, but don't take your sleep resilience for granted. Even if you fall asleep easily, prioritize sleep duration because your body still needs 7 to 9 hours to complete all the restorative processes that happen during sleep, regardless of how quickly you lose consciousness. Seventh, recognize the beauty of biological diversity. Blood types exist because different challenges require different solutions. No single blood type is superior. Type O survived malaria but was vulnerable to cholera. Type A adapted to agricultural diseases but became prone to cardiovascular issues. Type B thrived in nomadic flexibility but developed autoimmune tendencies. Type AB emerged from mixing and carries both advantages and vulnerabilities of its parent types. Every blood type represents a successful evolutionary strategy, a set of trade-offs that worked well enough for your ancestors to survive, reproduce, and pass their genes forward. The threats they faced are mostly gone, but the adaptations remain, sometimes helpful, sometimes problematic, always part of who you are. We started tonight asking what hidden advantages your blood type gives you, and now you know the answer is complicated. Every blood type has advantages and disadvantages, strengths and vulnerabilities, molecular trade-offs written in antigens. Understanding those patterns doesn't trap you. It frees you, because awareness is the first step toward making choices that support your unique biology. You can't change your blood type. It's written into every cell, but you can work with it, understand it, respect its tendencies, and build a life that honors your specific needs while refusing to be limited by genetic starting points. Your blood type is part of your story, not the whole story. And the best chapters, the ones where you thrive despite or because of your biology, those are still being written. So wherever you are tonight, whatever letters and symbols define the liquid flowing through you, remember you're carrying an ancient story, a genetic inheritance shaped by thousands of years of human survival, migration, adaptation, and resilience. If this journey changed how you see yourself, if it gave you insights worth keeping, consider sharing it with someone who might find it valuable too. And if you're curious about your own blood type and don't know it, consider finding out, not because it defines you, but because it's one more piece of self-knowledge, one more tool for understanding the remarkable biology keeping you alive right now, in this quiet moment, as you drift towards sleep. Your blood is working for you even now, carrying oxygen, fighting infections, maintaining the delicate balances that make consciousness possible. Rest well with that knowledge. Good night. We started tonight with a simple question, a question most people never think to ask. What does your blood type actually do for you beyond determining compatibility in emergencies? And over the last several hours, we've traveled deep into the hidden biology of those 4 letters and symbols you might have glimpsed once on a medical form and then forgotten. We've explored immune systems tuned differently depending on whether you carry A, B, both, or neither. We've examined digestive chemistry optimized for different ancestral diets, stress responses that spike and recover at different speeds, clotting tendencies that protect against some dangers while creating others. We've seen how blood type influences which infections you're more likely to fight off, which cancers you're more vulnerable to, how well your brain will age, and even the invisible ecosystem of bacteria living in your gut. And through it all, one theme kept appearing again and again, like a thread woven through every chapter: sleep. Your blood type influences how well you sleep, how deeply you rest, how efficiently your body repairs itself during those quiet hours when consciousness fades and biology takes over. Type A individuals with elevated cortisol struggle to quiet their minds, lying awake, replaying the day, waking frequently, never quite reaching the deep, restorative stages where the brain clears waste and consolidates memories. Type AB individuals with the thickest blood and highest inflammation face fragmented sleep that leaves them exhausted despite spending 8 hours in bed, their brains starved of the oxygen and waste clearance they need to function well the next day. Type O individuals, with their thinner blood and lower baseline stress hormones, generally sleep better, falling asleep more easily, staying asleep more consistently, waking more refreshed. Type B individuals with their flexible stress chemistry sleep variably, sometimes deeply, sometimes restlessly, depending on whether they experienced acute stress that evening or managed to wind down properly. These aren't personality differences or lifestyle choices. They're biological realities, written in antigens, expressed in hormones, manifested in the quality of rest you get every single night. And sleep matters more than almost anything else for long-term health. It's during sleep that your cardiovascular system gets its nightly break, blood pressure dropping, heart rate slowing, giving damaged vessels time to repair. It's during sleep that your immune system surveys your body for abnormal cells, destroying precancerous cells before they can grow into tumors. It's during sleep that your brain activates the glymphatic system, flushing out the metabolic waste and toxic proteins that accumulate during waking hours. Proteins that, if left to build up over decades, contribute directly to Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. It's during sleep that your gut microbiome produces neurotransmitter precursors, compounds your brain needs to regulate mood, manage stress, and maintain emotional stability. Poor sleep doesn't just make you tired the next day. It compounds every vulnerability your blood type already gives you. If you're type A or AB with elevated cardiovascular risk, poor sleep accelerates the vessel damage and plaque buildup that lead to heart attacks and strokes. If you're type A with higher cancer risk, poor sleep weakens the immune surveillance that catches abnormal cells early. If you're type AB with dramatically elevated cognitive decline risk, poor sleep prevents the waste clearance your brain depends on, allowing toxic proteins to accumulate faster, pushing you toward dementia earlier. Sleep is not optional. It's not a luxury you can sacrifice for productivity or entertainment. It's the foundation of health, and your blood type influences how easily you can access that foundation. But here's what gives this knowledge power. Once you understand your blood type's specific vulnerabilities and strengths, you can make targeted choices that work with your biology instead of against it. If you're type A, knowing about your elevated cortisol and fragmented sleep means you can prioritize stress management and sleep hygiene more seriously than someone with more resilient sleep. Chemistry. You can create evening routines that actively calm your nervous system. You can eliminate caffeine earlier in the day. You can practice meditation or deep breathing specifically designed to lower cortisol. You can treat sleep as the medical intervention it is, because for you, it literally is medicine, the most powerful preventive tool you have against the cardiovascular and cognitive risks your blood type makes you vulnerable to. If you're type AB, knowing about your thick blood and high stroke risk means you can't afford to be sedentary. Movement isn't just about fitness or weight. It's about keeping your blood flowing, preventing the inappropriate clotting that causes strokes and cognitive decline. You can prioritize exercise not because someone told you to, but because you understand at a molecular level why your body needs it more urgently than other blood types. You can advocate for yourself in medical settings, asking for cholesterol and blood pressure monitoring earlier and more frequently than standard guidelines suggest, because you know your baseline risk is higher, and early intervention could save your brain decades down the line. If you're type O, knowing about your lower cardiovascular risk but higher bleeding tendency means you can relax slightly about heart disease while being more cautious about activities with injury risk or medications that thin blood. Knowing about your high stomach acid means you can make dietary choices that support rather than irritate your digestive system, eating enough protein to give that acid something to work on, avoiding long fasting periods that leave acid attacking your stomach lining with nothing else to digest. You can use your generally better sleep quality as a foundation to build other healthy habits, recognizing that your resilience is an advantage but not a free pass to ignore your health entirely. If you're type B, knowing about your flexible but sometimes overreactive immune system means you can watch for autoimmune symptoms and address them early before they become chronic conditions. Knowing about your dairy tolerance means you don't have to follow dietary trends that demonize all dairy. You can include it if you enjoy it and tolerate it well, trusting your body's evolutionary adaptations. And knowing about your acute stress chemistry means you can develop strategies for managing stress spikes in the moment while also recognizing that your quick recovery is a genuine strength, not something to feel guilty about when you bounce back faster than friends who ruminate for days. What all of this comes down to is agency. Understanding your blood type gives you information, and information creates choices. You're not a passive victim of your antigens. You're an active participant in your health, armed now with knowledge about your specific starting point, your particular set of molecular trade-offs. You know where your vulnerabilities lie. You know which health metrics to monitor most carefully. You know which lifestyle interventions will give you the biggest return on investment. And you know that none of this is destiny, only tendency. Biology, creating inclinations that can be amplified or minimized by the choices you make every single day. Your blood type is an inheritance from ancestors who faced threats you'll never encounter, who survived plagues and famines and migrations that shaped the frequencies of A, B, and O genes in modern populations. Type O dominated in malarial regions because it protected children from severe infection. Type A became common in agricultural Europe because it adapted to the diseases of settled communities. Type B thrived in nomadic populations that needed dietary flexibility and immune versatility. Type AB emerged recently from the mixing of separated populations, carrying the legacy of both parent types. Every blood type exists because it worked, because people with those antigens survived long enough to reproduce, passing their blood type forward through thousands of generations until it reached you. And now you carry that legacy, those ancient adaptations, in a world completely different from the one that shaped them. Malaria is treatable. Agricultural diseases are mostly conquered. Nomadic flexibility is less important when most people live in one place their entire lives. But the adaptations remain, helpful in some contexts, problematic in others, always part of your biology. The wisdom is in recognizing which contexts you're living in now, which adaptations serve you and which create challenges, and adjusting your choices accordingly. So, as you drift towards sleep tonight, as your heart rate slows and your breathing deepens and consciousness begins to fade, know that your blood is still working, carrying oxygen, fighting pathogens, maintaining the balances that keep you alive. Know that the quality of the sleep you're entering matters profoundly. For every aspect of health we've discussed tonight, your heart, your immune system, your brain, your gut, your emotional resilience, know that your blood type influences that sleep quality. creating tendencies toward deep rest or fragmented waking, but that you have power to support your body's needs through the choices you make about when you sleep, how you prepare for sleep, what you eat, how you move, how you manage stress. If this journey changed how you see yourself, if it gave you insights worth remembering, consider sharing this with someone else who might benefit from understanding their own blood type biology. Leave a comment telling me your blood type and which insight surprised you most. I read every comment and I'm genuinely curious what resonated. And if you found value here, if you're grateful for deep dives into biology that actually matters for your daily life, subscribe so you don't miss future explorations into the hidden mechanisms keeping you alive. Until next time, rest well. Your blood knows what to do. Let it work while you sleep. Good night.